Holy relic! Holy relic! Stone glanced at the orc boys behind him. They were bristling to go. The fierce glint in their eyes and the taut bowstrings of the goblin archers promised a charge at the slightest order. He didn't rush. Instead, he turned to Bone Tree and dropped his voice. Inside this mine, apart from the entrance, are there any other exits? Bone Tree scratched his head and frowned. He thought for a long moment, then shook his head. I don't know. The tunnels are like a maze, full of forks. Some passages are so narrow only a Gretchen could squeeze through. We only dared to explore near the entrance. We didn't go deep. I can't promise there aren't other ways out. Stone nodded. Dwarf mines were notorious for hidden exits, vent shafts, emergency tunnels, and the night goblins who'd been living here so long would have mapped them all. A headlong assault risked being surrounded and slaughtered. His gaze fell on the Arachnari giant spider egg wrapped in a wool blanket, and a small, calculating smile twitched his lips. The night goblins revered those spiders as sacred. This egg might be the leverage they needed. Better to test its value than to blunder in. Orc boys, raise your round shields and take point, Stone barked. Goblin archers, fall in behind, knock your arrows, ready to fire. Spearmen, hold the cave mouth, watch the rear, no ambushes. 150 orc boys sprang into action, pulling the hardwood round shields from their backs, salvaged and reinforced with iron rims from previous raids. They paired up, locking shields into a braced wall, and advanced toward the mine entrance. Hold the spider egg up! Let the night goblins see it! Stone ordered the orc carrying the egg. 2 orcs lifted the wool-wrapped object above their heads. The deep purple shell caught the torchlight and gleamed. Even in the dark, it was unmistakable. Stone drew the iron axe from his belt and stepped first into the mine. Follow me. Watch for traps. The greenskin army flowed in behind him. The orc shield wall led, archers in the middle, torches throwing long shadows across the stone. The tunnel was larger than they'd expected, the floor paved with smooth flagstones in the dwarven style. Chisel marks still scored the walls where dwarves had quarried ore, and in places veins of dark brown iron gleamed faintly in the torchlight. They moved cautiously, footfalls echoed, and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling made everything feel hollow and quiet. No one noticed the countless pairs of small, gleaming eyes watching from niches in the walls and from cracks in the roof. Night goblins, cloaked in burlap the same shade as the stone, clung to the rock faces like geckos, many astride enormous mount spiders. They held short bows tipped with black poison, ready to loose a deadly rain of arrows at a single signal. Kez, leader of these night goblins, crouched in a higher fissure. His small green face was taut with anticipation. Slightly taller than most of his kind, he gripped a wooden staff bound with spider silk. A spider perched on his shoulder, spinning strands of silk. When Bone Tree first scouted the entrance, he'd taken the greenskins for lone scavengers and paid them no mind. Now, seeing a disciplined greenskin warband had roused alarm, but Kess felt exhilaration. This was his territory. He'd ordered traps dug at every fork, camouflaged pits lined with hidden spikes, great boulders rigged to fall at the pull of a rope, tunnels packed with dry grass ready to be set alight. Let them reach the third fork, Kez thought, and the traps would make meat of them. But then Kez's eyes locked on the object held high by the orcs. The shell's deep purple, the silver filigreed patterns, the faint hum of life within, it was unmistakable. An Arachnari giant spider's egg. "Stop! No one shoot!" Kez hissed, grabbing the night goblin beside him who was about to draw. His nails bit into the other's arm. The goblin grimaced but didn't protest. Around him, the others froze and turned. Confused, why had their leader called the halt? Only Kez understood the wrenching mix of fear and awe twisting him. To the night goblins, the Arachnari giant spider was an incarnation of the spider god, a living conduit. Shamans drew their power from spiders, summoning small broodlings, spitting tough webs, or beseeching the spider god for protection, and worship of the Arachnari was the cornerstone of their faith. Arachnari were exceedingly rare, living only in the deepest caves under precise conditions. Special poisonous mushrooms, stable temperatures, and steady prey. Only large night goblin tribes might possess a single Arachnari. Kess's tribe, barely 200 strong, had never seen one, let alone an egg. Now, a living egg hovered before his eyes. Kess's heart hammered, Dread and reverence washed away his plans to ambush. These greenskins, how could they possess such a relic? Were they messengers of the spider god? The thought staggered him. To attack might be sacrilege. To do nothing risked missing a god-sent blessing. Inside the mine, Stone kept the line moving, torch held high, and eyes sweeping for traps. The night goblins should have struck by now if they meant to ambush, yet nothing happened save the crackle of torches and the sound of marching. Strange, no movement, Bone Tree murmured, leaning in. Did they run? Stone shook his head. They haven't run. They're hiding. Keep moving. Watch the ceiling and walls. Don't relax. He knew the egg was working better than he'd hoped. Reverence could be as effective a shield as wood and iron. Kess's indecision deepened as the torchlight drew closer and the greenskins reached the first fork. He clenched his teeth and stared at the shimmering egg. Finally, curiosity and fear combined into a resolve. No matter what, he told himself, he had to come out and see. Who else would dare approach with such a sacred thing? The greenskin army crept down the mine tunnel, torchlight flickering off the stone walls and catching on veins of iron ore. Black-brown deposits embedded in the rock, their surfaces gleaming metallic, some streaked with faint rust. Stone's eyes roved over the ore, excitement stirring in his chest. He brushed his hand against the haft of his iron axe at his waist. With this ore, the tribe's weapons and tools could be reforged. Their fighting strength would jump another notch. He pushed the excitement down and sharpened his vigilance. The tunnel was too quiet. Aside from the footfalls of greenskins and the hiss of torch flames, there was no breeze, no distant drip, only an eerie stillness. Stone knew the night goblins hadn't left. They were hiding in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Scarface!" Stone called out, his voice echoing. Scarface scrambled from the ranks of the goblin archers, short legs taking him quickly to Stone's side. "Boss, I'm here." "Have the archers fire a few flaming arrows into the fork ahead," Stone ordered, pointing toward the dark split in the tunnel. "Keep your distance. Shoot and fall back." "Understood," Scarface barked, and the other goblins reached for arrows wrapped in kerosene-soaked cloth. They notched, lit, and released. With a hiss, the flaming shafts streaked into the tunnel, trailing orange fire that briefly brightened the cavern. The light revealed several palm-sized spiders scuttling along the wall, and a few blurry green figures slipping away to vanish around the fork. "Figures, we're surrounded," Stone said, the words cold in his mouth. He turned and roared, "Raise shields! Defensive formation!" The orc boys reacted instantly. Round shields went up and were braced together into a tight circle. At its center, the Arachnari giant spider egg was carefully protected. Orcs pressed their bodies around it as if it might shatter at the slightest blow. The goblin archers ducked inside the shield ring, arrows knocked, eyes sweeping the shadows. Stone planted himself at the front, iron axe gripped like an extension of his arm. He took a breath and called into the dark. "I know you're in there. We only came for the iron in this mine. I don't want to fight you to the death. But if you come with us, I'll give you this giant spider egg, on the condition that you listen to me." His words hung in the tunnel. After a moment, footsteps rasped from the shadows, and a night goblin rode a giant spider into the light. Taller than most night goblins, his face was painted with white skull markings. He wore a black cloak woven of spider silk and carried a wooden staff wrapped in the same thread, a black spider tooth affixed to its tip. His mount, half a man's height, had a glossy black carapace and quick, spidery legs that left faint strands of silk as it moved, one of the night goblin's death-crawler mounts. This was Kess, chieftain of the Green Poison Tribe. His gaze dropped to the egg guarded in the center of the formation, awe and suspicion warring in his eyes. "That giant spider egg, where did you get it?" he rasped. To night goblins, an Arachnari egg was sacred, like a gift from the gods. How had this ordinary greenskin chieftain come to possess one? Stone didn't answer. He stepped forward. The haft of his iron axe scraped the stone and sent a spark skittering across the floor. His voice was flat and hard. "I don't waste words. Either you come with me and the egg's yours, your green poison tribe will thrive with the Blackrock tribe, or we fight it out. If it comes to that, we take the ore and the egg stays with us." "Kill! Kill! Kill!" The orc boys could barely contain themselves. Roars rolled like thunder behind the shields as spiked clubs and axes bobbed, eyes gleaming for blood. Bone Tree stood between them, arms out, holding them back, murmuring sharp warnings to keep the boys from charging. Kes swept his gaze over the greenskin force and weighed what he saw. Solid orc frames and fierce faces, taut bowstrings of goblin archers. If it came to full battle, he might not win. But he wasn't about to bow easily. Night goblins were cowardly by nature, but they also had greenskin pride, and a chieftain could not surrender without a fight. He smiled, revealing sharp teeth. The green poison tribe only follows the strongest greenskin. If you want us to follow you, you must prove you're stronger than me. Stone's brow rose. Of course, their solution would be a one-on-one. For greenskins, it was the fairest way to settle matters, and Stone was good at it. He was about to accept when Kes added, "But it'll be on our terms. You both ride spiders and fight on their backs. Win, and we follow you. Lose, and you and your people leave this mine, without the egg." Ride a spider? Stone stiffened. He'd never ridden a spider. He despised the thought of crawling onto a hairy arthropod and felt his skin crawl at the idea. Kes anticipated the hesitation and nodded toward several death crawlers that had crept forward. They were slightly smaller than his mount, but stocky, legs planted to the ground, silk still glistening on their joints, ready to be used. Scared? Kes taunted, voice sharp. You won't even ride a spider, and you want to be chief? Night goblins from the dark joined in with mocking chatter. Stone's face darkened as the jeers washed over him. He looked from their faces to the spiders, then back at his own people. The hairs on the death crawler's legs made his scalp prickle, but he banished the feeling. He bared his teeth and snarled, "I don't need a mount to deal with cowards who hide in the dark." He stamped forward, driving the butt of his iron axe into the stone with a clang that silenced the tunnel. "Fine, I accept your one-on-one, but by my rules. No mounts, barehanded or with weapons, whatever. If you beat me, we go. If you lose, your tribe listens to me. The ore and the egg are ours." Kes regarded Stone's unblinking eyes, then looked to his own eager tribe and the grunting orcs behind Stone. He'd hoped to force them into an awkward choice, but Stone's refusal to use mounts was unexpected and bold. Backing down now would cost him face. He dismounted, planted his staff, and spat, "All right, we follow your rules. Don't go back on your word." "I keep my word," Stone said, and without another gesture, he dropped his iron axe. He cracked his knuckles until they popped, feeling the strength in his hands. From the shadows, the night goblins closed into a ring. The attackers behind Stone stilled, every eye fixed on the two chieftains. Torchlight painted the small clearing. The distant drip of water sounded unusually loud. Stone and Kes stood a few paces apart, alone in that circle of expectation. A one-on-one fight would decide the iron, the egg, and the fate of two tribes beneath the mine's low ceiling. The air hummed with tension as both prepared for the duel that would determine who the greenskins would follow. 63. Subdue the night goblins. In the mine's central clearing, torchlight threw long shadows of Stone and Kes across the stone floor. The greenskins on both sides watched tensely. The Blackrock orcs gripped round shields and cold stone axes. Goblin archers knocked arrows that never left their targets, and the night goblins of the green poison tribe crouched on their spider riders along the rock walls, poisoned shafts ready. Even the crackle of the torches sounded loud in the oppressive silence. "Begin!" Kes shouted low, leaping onto the back of his death crawler. The great spider tensed, its black carapace gleamed oily in the firelight, its compound eyes fixed on Stone as it spat fine silk threads. From his perch, Kes drew a short bow, an arrow tipped in pitch-black venom aimed at Stone's chest. Night goblins never fought without trying to gain an advantage first. Stone planted his feet, lowered his center of gravity, and fixed his gaze on Kes and the spider. Enhanced by the system, his reflexes were razor-sharp. His muscles were coiled to dodge. Kes's edge was the spider's mobility and the poisoned arrows. Stone needed to break their rhythm. An arrow hissed through the air, aimed straight for Stone's face. He lunged left, slamming a palm onto the stone and springing up like a sprung wire. The arrow grazed his scalp and buried itself in the wall, the black venom eating a small pit in the stone. The spider lunged instantly. Its spiky legs scraped on rock, and clear viscous fluid dripped from its open chelicerae, a sign of deadly toxin. Stone refused a head-on clash. He pivoted, backed away, and snatched the iron axe lying on the ground, slashing at the spider's leg. The axe rang against the carapace with a metallic crash, but only left a pale scratch. The deathcrawler's shell was far harder than he'd expected. Stone used the impact to leap back and dodge the spider's counterstrike. Kez curled his lip. He guided the spider with unnerving agility in the cramped tunnel, skittering along walls, springing up to strike from above, while his poisoned arrows fell like rain. The mine left Stone less and less room to evade. Several arrows barely missed him. His beast-hide armor was already cut in places. "Go, boss! Kill him!" The Blackrock greenskins roared, their voices edged with worry. Bone Tree clenched his fist. He had never seen Stone so restrained in a duel. Stone wasn't panicking. He was watching. All of Kess's attacks relied on the spider. Separated from it, Kess was poor at close combat. Moreover, before every strike, the spider's legs tensed first, a tell. Spotting that flaw, Stone slowed his evasions deliberately and exposed a weakness at his shoulder. Kess took the bait. He sent the spider in with a fierce lunge and drew his bow, aiming at Stone's shoulder. Stone rolled sharply to the right and swept the iron axe horizontally, not at Kess, but at the spider's leg. He poured everything into the blow, the bare strength magic surging through his muscles as the axe whistled and bit into the shell. This time the carapace split. Green blood sprayed. The deathcrawler shrieked and its hind leg buckled. It almost fell. Kess teetered on its back, almost thrown off. His arrow flew wide and stuck in the ground. Stone seized the opening and dove for Kez. The night goblin snatched a bone dagger and lunged. Stone sidestepped, grabbed Kess's wrist with his left hand, pressed the iron axe at his throat with his right, and the pair tumbled from the spider's back. They rolled across the stone, exchanging punches and kicks. Stone's fist cracked against Kess's face, smearing white war paint, and green blood spurted from his nose. Kess bit Stone's arm hard enough to draw a cry. They traded blows until both were bruised and bleeding, neither willing to yield. This duel was more than pride. It would decide the fate of two tribes. After 15 brutal minutes, they staggered apart, gasping. Kez's face was a bloody mess, one eye swollen shut. Stone's arm throbbed with a bite wound, and his cheek stung from multiple hits. Kez panted hoarsely. You're strong," he managed, but his eyes still blazed. "I haven't lost yet," he snarled, preparing to spring again. Stone realized this was dangerous. If the brawl dragged on, he might win but be too injured to hold the mine. Worse, the night goblins might use the chaos to ambush him. His gaze swept the clearing and landed on the Arachnari giant spider egg, protected in the night goblin's shield formation. An idea clicked. "Since you refuse to yield, I'll destroy your sacred thing." Stone barked and ran for the giant egg, lifting his iron axe as if to smash it. Kess's expression changed in an instant. He abandoned the duel and screamed as he charged after him. The spider egg was sacred to the night goblins. If it were destroyed, Kess would be branded a traitor by his people, no matter what else he had done. He had to stop Stone. Exactly what Stone wanted. After a few steps, Stone abruptly stopped, twisted, and crashed into the pursuing Kez. Before the goblin could react, Stone grabbed his shoulders, heaved, and slammed him to the stone. Kez hit the ground hard, his vision blurred. Stone straddled him and let his fists rain down. "Do you submit?" Stone roared, punching into Kez's chest. "And no, I don't submit!" Kez gritted out, trying to resist. A blow snapped more teeth free. Green blood ran down his mouth. His senses were dimming. He met Stone's relentless gaze and felt every ache in his body until he could no longer hold on. I submit. Stop, please," he gasped. Stone halted, panting. He rose and wiped blood from his face. He turned to the night goblins and shouted, "Your leader has admitted defeat. Green Poison Tribe, will you follow me?" The night goblins exchanged looks. They glanced from the beaten Kess to the victorious Stone and to the Blackrock ranks behind him. Resistance would be useless. Kez hauled himself up, wiped his face, and barked at his tribe. "Don't just stand there. From today on, the Green Poison Tribe will follow the Blackrock tribe." A flicker of hope stirred in Kez. If they submitted, Stone might hand over the Arachnari egg for them to care for. The night goblins quickly dismounted, set their weapons aside, and bowed to Stone. "Hail, boss!" they intoned, voices uneven but respectful. The Blackrock greenskins erupted in thunderous cheers. The boss won! Orcs brandished their axes, and goblin archers leaped, their shouts filling the mine. Stone scanned the surrendered night goblins and the iron veins in the walls. A satisfied smile crossed his face. He had not only secured the iron mine, but also brought an entire night goblin tribe under his control. With their help, mining and tunneling would be far easier. He walked up to Kess, clapped a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Follow me properly, and you'll be rewarded." As for that giant spider egg, Kess's eyes brightened instantly. He stared at Stone, waiting for the rest. 64. Iron ore acquired. Kess stared at Shito, breath quickening with anticipation. He had been waiting for the transfer of the Arachnari giant spider egg. After all, it was a sacred relic of the night goblins and the main reason they had bent the knee. But Shito's next words stunned him. "Oh, by the way, Kess," Shito said, ignoring the egg entirely and pointing toward the mine. "You said there's iron ore here. Where exactly is it, and how much?" The hope drained from Kess's face. He scratched the back of his head and forced a smile. "Yes, there's iron ore. In the innermost part of the mine, an old dwarven vein. There's a lot left, but our tribe doesn't have the manpower. Night goblins don't like mining. We prefer riding spiders and ambushing from the dark, so we haven't minded much." Shito's attention locked on the words iron ore, and Kess's disappointment vanished unnoticed. "Not enough manpower? Don't like mining?" Shito's eyes gleamed. This was perfect, an old dwarven mine full of iron and no one to exploit it. He waved his hand and roared to the green skins behind him. "Orc boys, follow me. Let's see the night goblin tribe and find the iron." Whack! 150 orc boys answered with thunderous shouts, stone axes and spiked clubs raised. Goblin archers and spearmen fell in behind them, their boots echoing down the shaft and loosening pebbles from the ceiling. Kez and the night goblins froze. No greeting, no negotiation, just a charge. They had already submitted, though, so they dared not delay. They mounted their spiders and followed. The night goblins' settlement was deeper and stranger than Shito had imagined. Everything leaned into darkness. Their huts were built from pitch-black hardwood and coated with a thick, oily resin that repelled moisture and pests. Roofs were a mat of thick spider silk and dry grass. From a distance, the dwellings looked like black beehives. Paths between huts were paved with smooth flagstone set with strips of bioluminescent moss, glow moss the night goblins had cultivated to brighten the subterranean night without torches. At the center lay a circular open space where huge webbed frames were stretched to dry furs and bleached bones. Clay pots of a glossy black poison gave off a sharp, bitter smell. Natural caverns hemmed the village in. Stalactites hung like teeth from the ceiling. Stalagmites thrust up like broken columns, and some pools of standing water reflected the green moss light with an eerie sheen. Some goblins lived directly in cave niches, others in the black huts clustered beside them. The whole settlement felt secret and tidy, a place designed to be hidden. "This place is good, well hidden and tidy," Shito observed, nodding to himself. It would make an ideal mining base, secure, convenient, and populated by natives who knew the tunnels. "Bone Tree? Over here!" Shito called. Bone Tree came bounding up, stone axe in hand, face alight. "Boss, what's up?" "You know about the iron. Show us where it is," Shito said, pointing at a nearby rock wall. Bone Tree perked up and marched over. He squinted at a streak of dark brown rock threaded with a metallic sheen. "This is it," he shouted. He swung his massive arm and smashed the wall. With a thunderous crack, a piece the size of a wash basin fell free. Bone Tree scooped it up, wiped the dust away, and held the rock out. "Boss, look, iron ore. Feel the weight. Look at the veins. Good ore." Shito took it in both hands. It was heavy and cool, the surface streaked with faint metallic lines, exactly the ore he had seen in the old records. He couldn't help laughing with triumph. "Ha ha! Excellent!" He lifted the ore for all to see and barked to the waiting crowd. "Boys, see this? Iron ore. With this we'll have proper armor, axes, and great hammers. We can forge sharper, sturdier weapons and fight bigger battles." Wah! Wah! "Weapons! We want iron weapons." The greenskins erupted. Orc boys waved axes, picturing steel blades. Goblins cheered at the idea of iron arrowheads and spears strong enough to pierce leather armor. Kez and his night goblins watched in bewilderment. Mining and forging had never stirred them, until Shito turned back to them with a grin. "Kes, almost forgot," Shito said. Kez braced himself for another demand. "Boss, just say it. We'll do it." "You keep the Arachnari giant spider egg. Shito said. You know the underground and how to raise the spiders. I trust you with it, he added. And anything your tribe needs, iron shortbows, bone daggers, cloaks woven from spider silk, tell me. I'll have the tribe's blacksmiths forge them. Kes's eyes widened. Really? The egg and iron weapons? Of course, Shito said, thumping his chest. As long as you follow me, help us mine the ore, and care for the egg, you won't be left wanting. The night goblins burst into excited chatter. Iron arrowheads meant poisoned bolts that could punch through leather, perfect for ambushes. Kes shouted to his tribe, barely able to contain himself. Hear that? The boss is entrusting us with the sacred relic, and he'll give us iron weapons. From now on, we follow him and walk as we please. Walk! The night goblins' cheers swelled, louder even than the Blackrock tribes. Shito looked over the two cheering green-skinned tribes with satisfaction. Taking the night goblins, securing the iron vein, and uniting the tribes, this expedition had exceeded his expectations. He crouched to touch the cool ore and let his mind race ahead. Bone Tree would lead the orc boys to clear the shafts, the night goblins would mine the ore, and their blacksmiths would turn it into tools and weapons. Once their strength grew, there would be more tribes to bring to heel. 65. Yadu, Ironhold. Outside the Blackrock tribe's wooden palisade, the snow had only just begun to melt. Shito returned in triumph with the Greenskin army, followed by the excited night goblins. He was about to gather the orc boys and goblins to announce the conquest of the Green Poison tribe and the discovery of the iron mine when a system prompt rang out in his mind. Congratulations, host, for successfully subjugating the Green Poison tribe, establishing a second territory, and unlocking the province system. Please name the two major territories. After naming, the territory management panel and resource interoperability functions will be activated. Province system? Shito paused, then understood. His tribe was no longer just a single camp. It could now be managed as a province, able to govern multiple territories. Much easier for future expansion. He looked at the familiar main camp of the Blackrock tribe, then to the Night Goblins' camp in the mine, and quickly made his decision. The main camp will be called Yadu, he decided. The Greenskins used teeth as currency, and Yadu, the tooth capital, fit their style and symbolized the tribe's center of wealth and strength. The mine territory will be called Ironhold, he went on. Iron was the asset there. Ironhold sounded simple and commanding, fitting for a resource-rich strongpoint. Territory naming successful. The province system is officially activated. Current province name, Blackrock Province, governing Yadu and Ironhold. Unlocked functions. 1. Territory resource interoperability, allows allocation of supplies and troops between territories. 2. Territory management panel, real-time view of population, production, and construction in both territories. 3. Province missions, completion grants additional WOG value and special rewards. Shito nodded in satisfaction. The province system would make management orderly. He wouldn't have to run himself ragged moving supplies by hand. He began assigning troops and tasks at once. Bone Tree, you take 100 orc boys to Ironhold and oversee the iron mining, he ordered. Bone Tree stepped forward, pounding his chest in assurance. Don't worry, boss. I used to work in human mines. I know how to dig. I'll get loads and loads of iron. He really did know mining, the only greenskin in the tribe with experience in human-style shafts, the perfect choice to run Ironhold. Kes, take all the night goblins to Yadu. For now, get them familiar with the place, help watch the Arachnari giant spider egg, and learn Yadu's rules. Night goblins excelled at stealth and underground work. Keeping them in Yadu would protect the core camp while letting them adapt. Kes nodded eagerly. He had long wanted to see Yadu after hearing Bone Tree speak of all the novel things there. Bone Tree gathered his orc boys and marched to Ironhold. He had taken 100 in name, but the first working party of 50 set out carrying stone axes, iron chisels, and torches to start the shafts. Kes led the night goblins, about 210 of them, riding death crawlers, and followed Shito into Yadu. The night goblins froze at the sight. The greenskin camps they knew were usually filthy and chaotic, mud, trash, and the stench of unwashed life. Yadu was nothing like that. The ground was paved with smooth stone slabs, wooden bins stood every few steps and were neatly emptied, thatched huts were aligned and tidy, Roofs were swept clean of snow. There was even a proper latrine built from planks, lined with dry grass, dug deep, exactly like the latrines in human towns. Is this really a greenskin camp? One night goblin whispered, stunned, careful not to soil the stone slabs as he rode his spider. Kez, too, was amazed. He peered at the simple pictogram on the latrine sign. Greenskins were mostly illiterate, so symbols showed function, and at the spotless surroundings. The boss is incredible, he breathed. He really can run a tribe. The night goblins worshipped Gork and Mork like everyone else, and seeing such cleanliness and order convinced them only a mighty leader could make a tribe look like this. Shito watched their adoration with satisfaction. He sent a goblin scout to lead the night goblins around, letting them familiarize themselves with the huts and camp layout, while he went to inspect the lumberyard. He still needed to check infrastructure progress and solve how to move iron ore. At Ironhold, Bone Tree had already started hot digging with the orc boys. Down in the abandoned dwarf mine, torches lit the huge tunnel. The orcs split into two teams, one with chisels and stone hammers working the ore seams, the other hauling the broken ore out, bundling it with vines and carrying it to the mouth of the mine. Keep chipping. If anyone slacks, I'll throw him into the deepest pit for the spiders. Bone Tree barked, smashing his iron chisel into the face until a fist-sized chunk of iron dropped free. Years as a slave in human mines had taught him where the ore lay and how much force to use for maximum yield. The orc boys didn't know mining technique, but they had strength. Under Bone Tree's orders, they learned the basics fast. Drive the chisel into a crack with a hammer, then pry and chip out a chunk. Some lacked patience and simply rammed the rock with their shoulders. They winced and bled, but still brought down ore. Phosphorescent moss painted the sweaty figures in green light. In less than half a day, a small pile had gathered at the entrance, dark brown ore flashing metallic under the green glow. If the boss sees this, he'll give us beer, one orc said, wiping sweat. The others cheered. For greenskins, the boss's approval and beer were the best rewards. Back in Yadu, the lumberyard exploded with shouting. She too found Big Valley surrounded by several goblins, all crowded around a strange wooden contraption. It looked like a small cart, hardwood body, two wooden wheels rimmed in iron, taken from the human camp, two shafts bound with vines, and, most notable, a wooden and rope pump in the middle. Several Gretchen workers poked at it curiously. "Boss, you're here! We did it!" Big Valley ran up, face beaming. "It's the Gretchen pump cart. It's for the Gretchen." Shito inspected the contraption closely. Big Valley explained, excited. No animals needed to pull it. Gretchens sit in front and step on pedals. The pedals drive the pump in the middle, which turns the wheels. It can haul 100 caddies of wood or ore at once. In war, we can mount stone axes or short bows on the body and use it as a war chariot. The faster the Gretchen pedals, the steadier it runs. Useful, right? Big Valley had two Gretchen volunteers demonstrate. They clambered into the front seats and started pedaling. The pump groaned, the wheels turned, and the cart rolled forward slowly and steadily. Even the rocks placed on top didn't fall. Shitu's eyes lit up. After mining, transportation had been the thorn in their side. Orcs were poor carriers and tired quickly. The pump cart solved that problem and doubled as a war platform. "Big Valley, this is a huge help," Shito said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Make these in quantity. Use the lumberyard materials. Build 50 more. If needed, add more hands. Get it done fast." Big Valley flushed with pride. "Understood. I'll arrange it. I guarantee 50 pump carts in 3 days." With that, Big Valley raced off to organize production. Shito watched him go, then looked toward Ironhold, anticipation swelling. The province system meant Yadu and Ironhold could share resources. The pump cart fixed the transport problem. With night goblins and orc boys doing what they did best, Blackrock Province's pace of development would only accelerate. In the plaza, the night goblins wandered and explored. Some watching the orcs train in the fighting pit, others peering into the green mushroom tavern. In the lumberyard, goblins hammered and sawed as the new carts took shape, clanks and creaks never ceasing. And in Ironhold, the orc boys chiseled on, the pile of iron ore growing higher by the hour. 66. Prince Patton led 8 sons. Most of the snow in the howling forest had melted in the spring breeze. Tender green grass pushed up through the mud, new leaves unfurled on the branches, and even the howling wind had lost some of its bite, carrying a hint of warmth. The Blackrock tribe was welcoming its first spring. Yadu and Ironhold were bustling. The mushroom fields in Yadu had been expanded repeatedly. The 3 medium plots that used to be there had doubled to 6, and 2 smaller beds for poisonous mushrooms had been added, used by the night goblins to brew poisons and to feed the Arachnari giant spider. Goblins with bamboo baskets moved through the beds, carefully harvesting ripe fungi. Pigeon laborers swung hoes, turning the soil to plant fresh spore bags. Even the songs they hummed sounded cheerful. Ironhold was livelier still. 50 Pigeon pump carts ran every day between the mine and Yadu. The rumble of their wheels on the stone road was constant. Each cart was piled high with iron ore, dark brown rocks that gleamed coldly in the sun as they were hauled to the blacksmith shop in Yadu. Bone Tree had led the orc boys to dig the mine deeper. They had not only hit denser veins of ore, but had also unexpectedly uncovered a forge left behind by the dwarves. After a little cleaning and repair, they could smelt iron blocks right in Ironhold, saving a lot of hauling. The Green Mushroom Tavern had become Yadu's busiest place. After work, the orc boys came in with stone axes slung over their shoulders, ordered fungus beer, and bragged while tearing into roasted mushroom slices. The night goblins preferred the corners, quietly discussing stealth techniques and nursing a drink. Chubby roasted mushrooms in the kitchen, while Skinny Pole brewed wine at the bar. Both were constantly busy, but wore energized, satisfied expressions. The tavern's profits had soared, bringing the tribe nearly 100 teeth a month, and their own wages had gone up as well. That afternoon, Shito sat by the tavern window with a skewer of golden-brown squig jerky, grease at the corner of his mouth. Squig jerky was a new snack Chubby had developed. Strips of squig meat cured with salt and herbs and air-dried until fragrant and chewy, perfect with fungus beer. The tavern was noisy. Some greenskins played finger-guessing games. Others argued about who'd been the toughest in the last fight. It felt alive. Boss, come out quick, see this!" Scarface's voice sounded urgent from outside. Shitu set the jerky down, wiped his mouth, and stepped out. Scarface was striding toward him, holding a human teenager by the collar. The boy's feet dangled off the ground. He struggled but didn't cry, his face as pale as paper. Greenskins crowded around, curious. The orc boys reached out to poke the boy's golden hair, only to recoil when Scarface shot them a glare. Night goblins on small spiders circled, black eyes narrowed. Even passing Pigeon laborers stopped to crane a neck. Humans were rare in Yadu, and a delicate-looking one was rarer still. The teenager looked 15 or 16, wearing a worn silk jacket that should have been white but was stained with dirt and grass. The fabric's quality still showed. His tangled golden hair stuck with bits of grass, and his sea-blue eyes were wild with fear. He stared at the greenskins, trembling, forcing himself not to cry. "Scarface, where did you get him?" Shito asked as he stepped closer, noting the boy's slender, uncalloused fingers and the faint scent of spices about him, signs he wasn't a commoner. Scarface set the boy down. The teenager stumbled back, took 2 fearful steps, and found himself completely surrounded. Scarface clapped his hands. A patrolling deathcrawler found him under the western cliff. He was hanging on a pine, rope nearly snapped, barely alive. The night goblins dragged him back to Yadu. Shito's brow rose. The western cliff was dozens of miles from Yadu, a treacherous stretch where few ventured. How had this human ended up hanging from a pine there? He crouched, trying to soften his tone. "Kid name? Where from? How did you fall off a cliff?" The boy flinched at Shito's green skin and sharp teeth. His lips moved, but no sound came. The greenskins jeered. "Talk, or we'll feed you to the spiders," one shouted. "The boss is asking, don't play mute," another barked. Tears welled, but the boy gritted his teeth and whispered in the greenskin tongue, I am Feluole. I come from Prince Patton's fiefdom." Prince Patton's fiefdom? Shitu's curiosity pricked. That southern land was one of the 3 kingdoms known for commerce, not far from Katushir Hold. Many of the human merchant caravans his crews had raided came from there. Feluole grew bolder when Shitu stayed silent and continued, "I am the 8th son of the Earl of Coventry in Prince Patton's fiefdom. My family has 9 sons and 4 daughters." His voice dropped, loneliness flickering in his eyes. My mother's family used to be noble but fell on hard times. Father never favored me. He sent me away to travel and trade, but my brothers, they plotted against me. Shito leaned in, signaling him to go on. The greenskins hushed. Tales of human noble infighting were juicy gossip, better than watching the orc boys squabble over meat. Feluale took a breath and told his story. Father sent me with a caravan to the eastern city-state of Estalia to sell silk and spices. I was supposed to make a good profit. Before we left, my third brother offered to help manage the caravan guards so I'd have an easier trip. I thanked him. I didn't know he was setting a trap. One night, bandits attacked. They didn't steal the goods, only came for me. I realized the guards and drivers had been bought off by my brother. They were all there to kill me. His voice shook with fear and anger. I fought and broke free, mounted a horse, and fled. They chased me until they drove me to the edge of the western cliff. I had no choice but to jump. I was caught halfway down by a pine. I hung there for 2 days and nights without food or water, sure I was going to die, until your patrol found me this morning. Tears finally fell. Please, don't eat me. Shito thought it over. Feluole was simply a noble's unfortunate son. Because his mother's family had lost standing, he'd been disfavored and thus targeted by his brothers. Had luck not favored him, he'd be a corpse at the cliff's base. Shitu's mind began to click through possibilities. Prince Patton's fiefdom was wealthy. Iron, weapons, grain, even human technology. Even an unfavored son was blood of the Earl. They could ransom him, squeeze intelligence from him, or use him as a way into trade with human nobles. The orc boys had cruder thoughts. They licked their lips and eyed Feluole hungrily. Boss, this human's worthless. Let's roast him and eat him. Yeah, human meat must taste better than squig. Feluole nearly collapsed at the words. Don't eat me. My father is the Earl of Coventry and very rich. You can ransom me. He'll pay. Quiet. She too barked at the rowdy orc boys. This kid's useful. You will not eat him. The orc boys grumbled but obeyed, still staring as if the boy were a slab of meat. Shito fixed Feluole with a look. You can live, but you must obey me. Answer every question I ask. Do every task I give. Try any tricks and I won't hesitate to throw you to the Arachnari giant spider. The name alone made Feluole shiver. He nodded fiercely, voice choked with tears. I'll obey. I'll do whatever you say. Please don't feed me to the spiders. Satisfied, Shito ordered the nearby goblin scout. Take him and lock him in a clean straw hut. Feed him and give him water twice a day. Make sure he doesn't run and don't let the others bully him. The scout took the order, seized Feluole's arm, and led him into the camp's depths. The boy glanced back while they walked, eyes full of fear but no resistance. His fate was now in greenskin hands. With the excitement over, the crowd dispersed. Some returned to the mushroom fields, others back to the tavern for a drink. Shito stayed watching Feluole's retreating figure, calculating. A noble from Prince Patton's fiefdom, this could be a new opportunity for the development of Blackrock Province. As night fell, the bonfires in Yadu flared up, and the greenskins' laughter drifted from the square, mingling with the clatter of finger-guessing games coming from the taverns. Shito carried a string of sizzling squig skewers in one hand and a pot of freshly brewed green mushroom wine in the other. He moved lightly toward the little thatch hut where Feluole was being held, a tidy wooden shack, originally for goblin scouts, now guarded by 2 goblin spearmen. When they saw him, they stopped roughhousing and came to attention. The lamp inside was small and dim. Feluole lay on the bed, pale, eyes fixed on the thatch roof, hollow and unresponsive even when the door opened. Shito set the skewers on the small table by the head of the bed and put the wine pot down with a soft clink. Only then did Feluole turn his head and glance at the food. The golden-brown squig meat still glistening with oil, its aroma rich, the wooden wine pot carved with simple patterns. He looked once, then turned his face back to the ceiling and said hoarsely, "Thank you. I don't have an appetite." Shito said nothing. He sat on the edge of the bed, picked up a skewer, and bit into it. The skin was crisp, the meat tender and juicy. The smell filled his mouth. He chewed slowly, watching the youth on the bed. Feluole was only 15 or 16, an age that should have been spent studying and riding in a noble manner, not here, a broken boy captured by greenskins. Chiteau had been betrayed before, too. He knew the cold of being stabbed by someone you trusted. He swallowed, and a voice stripped of the usual gruffness spoke gently. It doesn't feel good to be stabbed in the back by the person closest to you, does it? Feluale stiffened. His fingers clenched the straw mat, and his eyes reddened. He didn't answer, but tears slid from the corners of his eyes onto the pillow. Anyone who's been schemed against by his own brother and forced to jump off a cliff would feel the pain, Chiteau said. He didn't try to cheer him up with platitudes. He sat down and met Feluale's gaze. That pain isn't just being oversensitive. It's real, like a piece of flesh ripped from your heart. Those words were a key turning in a lock. Feluale's shoulders trembled and tears came faster. He bit his lip to stop himself from crying out. Noble pride kept him from losing control in front of greenskins. Chiteau watched him struggle and went on. You don't need to tell yourself you weren't good enough. That's why your father ignored you and your brother plotted against you. They failed as a family. Your third brother threw away brotherly affection for a title. Your father only cared about family interests and disregarded his son's life. The blame is theirs, not yours. Feluale turned his head, azure eyes wide with shock, as if he had never heard anyone say that before. All his life he'd been told things like, if you worked harder, father would like you, or if you knew how to please people like your third brother, you wouldn't have been sent away to manage the trade route. He had come to believe he was not good enough. But now this greenskin chieftain told him the fault wasn't his. Is it really not my fault? He asked, voice trembling. Of course not. Chiteau nodded, firm. It isn't your fault your mother's family fell from grace, and it isn't your fault you couldn't win your father's favor. They used you as a pawn for their own ends. They're the villains, not you. Feluale's sobs came freely then. Grievance, fear, and anger that had been held back burst out. Chiteau said nothing, simply kept him company and nibbled on the half-eaten skewer. After a long time, Feluale calmed, wiped his eyes with his sleeve, and some of the hollow look left his face, replaced by a clarity that carried a hint of defiance. It's all right to be sad, but don't get stuck there. Chiteau handed him a skewer. You're only 15 or 16. You have a long life ahead. You deserve warmer companions and a better life, not to be trapped in that cold place, the Earl of Coventry's mansion, and used like a disposable pawn. Feluale took the skewer and held it without eating. He stared at the roasted meat as a new resolve grew inside him. He thought of his third brother's hypocritical smile, his father's disappointed gaze, his siblings' private mockery of him as the son of a fallen noble. A fresh anger rose. I don't want to be like this anymore, he said quietly but firmly. I don't want to be looked down on, and I don't want to run away like a stray. Chiteau's eyes brightened. He had reached the point he wanted. He set down the wine pot, leaned in, and let his voice sharpen with a touch of fire. You don't want to be looked down on? Then make them see you as the most capable person to inherit the title at the Coventry house. Make those who schemed against you and those who neglected you have to look up to you someday. But I have nothing. The light in Feluale's eyes faltered. He laughed bitterly. I don't have my brother's influence. I don't have my father's favor. And even my trade caravan was bought off. What can I fight them with? Chiteau smiled knowingly, just as he'd intended. He patted Feluale's shoulder and said casually, You don't have it, but I do. Feluale stared at him, confused. You mean Catastrophe hold? Chiteau asked. Feluale nodded. Catastrophe hold was a neutral princely fief between several powers, a place of thriving trade where noble titles could be bought by those with means. You can go to Catastrophe and start there by acquiring a title, Chiteau said slowly. Catastrophe is neutral, so it won't stop you from returning to Prince Patton's fiefdom later to press your claim to the Earl of Coventry's title. In fact, a Catastrophe title will give you 3 times the authority when you speak there. Feluale's breath quickened, and a spark returned to his eyes. He had thought about escaping, but never imagined staging a comeback like that. I can help you, Chiteau went on, baiting the promise. The capital you need to begin trading in Catastrophe, I'll provide it. We confiscated a lot of gold and jewels from the slaver squad we ambushed. Greenskins don't use such things, so they're just gathering dust in our warehouse. I can also help with connections. I can reach the greenskin tribes in Katushir and some human merchants. Feluole looked at Shito's green skin and sharp, calculating eyes and felt suspicion. There's no free lunch. Why would this chieftain help him? What do you want in return? He asked, keeping his voice steady. Shito laughed softly. He poured a cup of green mushroom wine, tasted it, and answered, It's simple. Once you establish your merchant guild in Katushir, that guild must serve my Blackrock province. You'll prioritize supplying the iron ore, weapons, and grain I need. If I need information about Prince Patton's fiefdom, you must pass it along promptly. Our agreement ends only when you have successfully inherited the Earl of Coventry's title. The terms weren't harsh, they were fair. Feluole did the math. He needed capital and help. Shito needed supplies and intelligence. Besides, Feluole was the sort of person who repaid kindness. If Shito would lift him up, it was only right he should serve the Blackrock province for a few years. He tightened his grip on the skewer, resolve hardening in his eyes. I agree, he said. If you help me make my comeback, my merchant guild will prioritize serving you. Good. Decisive. Shito laughed and handed him another skewer. Try our green skin barbecue. With this green mushroom wine, it's incredible. Feluole bit into the meat, crisp skin, tender flesh, a hint of spice. Better than the roasted meat at the Coventry mansion. He drank the wine the chieftain offered. Sweet with a faint bitterness, it warmed him through. They sat by the bed, eating and drinking, the conversation growing companionable. Feluole's despair had been replaced by a cautious hope. Shito outlined the plan. A few days in Yedu to learn how the tribe worked. Then night goblins would escort him to Katushir's main city, while others transported the gold and jewels to serve as startup capital. The oil lamp threw their silhouettes across the hut, one green-skinned, the other blonde with blue eyes. Races that should have been enemies sat like allies at a small wooden table, sharing food and wine and a secret plan for a comeback. Outside, bonfires painted the night, and the greenskins' laughter rose on the air. Shito knew the spark of ambition he had lit in Feluole might become the key to Blackrock Province's rise. And Feluole understood that the rough greenskin chieftain before him would be the most important benefactor in his life. Perhaps even a confidant. Iron! Iron! The north wind that had howled all winter finally lost its bite, and a warm spring breeze pushed through the howling forest. Snow slid from the branches in little ribbon streams. Tender green shoots pushed up through the dead grass. Squirrels bounded from bough to bough with pine cones, and even the squig, dormant all winter, crawled from its burrow and waddled off to forage. The season had turned. Outside the abandoned dwarf mine at Ironhold, life was as busy as a boiling cauldron. Over 30 orc boys, bare-chested and sweating, their green skin gleaming with an oily sheen in the sun, crowded around 3 blacksmith shops built of stone and clay. They swung iron hammers bigger than their heads. The clang of metal on metal vibrated through the ground and fought with the distant birdsong. Bone Tree and the orc boys had put the shops up themselves. The furnace walls were built from refractory stone pulled from deep in the mine, and the chimneys ran straight to the ventilation shafts. Bellows of hide and hardwood were worked by 2 pigeing laborers, stomping the pedals and whooshing air into the blaze. Orange-red flames licked the crucibles, heating iron billets until they glowed. The scene looked chaotic. Some orc boys missed the billet and smashed the anvil instead, sending a shower of sparks flying. Others, annoyed at slow bellows, shoved a Gretchen aside and pumped the pedals themselves, leaving the hammer idle while the hot iron cooled on the anvil. A few finished a piece and proudly held it up, only to yelp when a spray of sparks scorched their arm. Yet beneath the chaos there was order. Someone tended the fire, someone hammered, someone hauled finished billets. No one barked orders, but each knew their place as if by long-standing agreement. Mistakes merited curses and a shrug, then everyone went back to swinging. Clang, clang, the anvil rings and sparks fly. My hammer, spin it round. Smash the iron, red iron soft and hot. One blow makes a choppa. Clang, rage and filings on a green beard. Gork and Mork watch, slack off and find a poke. Smash hard, don't dawdle, break the boys' backs. Clang, rivets bite thick iron. My armor, hard as stone. Arrows bounce off. Orc boys round the furnace, sparks scorch their feet. Clang, clang, sweat and soot. Make big clubs, Forge heavy knives. Tomorrow, we kick doors and steal the ale. Gork and Mork grin. Sparks are cooler than blood. Clang, clang. Last strike shakes the earth. Grab your gear. Whack! Orcs fear no loss. Iron is courage. Blood is fire. If you don't like it, lose your head. Hammer iron. Whack! Fight and guzzle ale. Hammer iron. Whack! We're the biggest and the best. They sang off-key as they worked. Slowly, the falling hammers found the chant's cadence, the ring becoming its drumbeat. Orcs were not natural smiths in the way dwarves or humans were. Dwarf smiths kept strict control of heat, force, and quench timing. Human smiths prized measured strikes and coordination. Orcs forged by feel. When the metal glowed, they threw it on the anvil, swung, and when it looked good enough, they plunged it into water. A hissing puff of steam and a smell of steam meant the iron was done. Yet orcs had their own knack, da orky way. If an orc believed a lump could be an axe, it would take that shape. If he thought a hammer was tough, it tended not to break. They had started with twisted lumps and broken stone hammers, wasting iron by the hundreds of pounds, but their confidence and stubbornness bred a crude art. The iron they now made was rough, pitted, unsharpened, edges uneven. Still, orc boys loved it. From one billet, they could forge a half-man-high iron axe, blades not keen but heavy enough to split a tree in two. They could make thick shields, rimmed with riveted plates, clumsy and crude, but able to stop a stone arrow or a bone tree dagger. Bigger is walk, heavier is better, was their creed. With poor metal quality, orcs compensated with mass. Strength was plentiful, and weight made things feel right in their hands. Stone stepped onto the soft earth and crossed into the smithing yard. A wave of heat, hot metal, and coal hit him. He walked among the three shops and surveyed the finished goods on the anvils, axes whose blades curled to one side, spears with dull tips, shields caved from uneven blows. "Boss, you're here!" Bone Tree ran up, bare-chested and proud, holding a steaming axe he'd just hammered out. "Look at this iron! Is it wag enough?" Stone took the axe. It was heavy, easily 20 pounds, but the blade was crooked and the edges hadn't been dressed down. There were dents where quenching had been mishandled. He frowned. Heavy enough, but not good enough. This blade's warped. That shield dents from one strike. How is that supposed to stop an enemy? Bone Tree scratched his head, embarrassed. We figured it only has to chop people. Heavier means more hurt when you smash them." Stone didn't answer. He went back to the furnace and picked up a red-hot billet. It was unevenly heated. The edges were already blackened from poor temperature control. Counting roughly, nearly half the pile by the anvils were rejects, warped, not hard enough, or cracked during forging. The failure rate was high. For orcs, good enough was often good enough. But Stone knew the tribe needed better weapons to stand against the forces of chaos or the elite human troops. "We need to fix quality," he muttered. Maybe they could pillage a human smithy and drag back a few artisans, or ask Feluole if Prince Patton's fief had skilled blacksmiths. He didn't have a plan yet. He just sounded like he did to stay boss-like. "Keep hammering," he told Bone Tree, patting his shoulder. "Watch the heat. Don't burn billets. Give me a few days and I'll figure something out." "I get it, boss," Bone Tree replied and thumped his chest. "I'll make the orc boys be more careful." Stone left the smiths and headed toward the deep cavern of Ironhold, where the Arachnari giant spider egg was kept. Kez and a handful of night goblins who specialized in spider rearing tended it. The cave was dim, lit only by phosphorescent moss that bathed everything in a faint green. The air was damp and perfect for hatching. At the cavern entrance, Kez knelt on a stone platform, carefully cleaning the egg with a soft brush. A few night goblins waited with ceramic pots of a nutrient solution, a mix of poisonous mushrooms, spider venom, and phosphorescent moss juice meant to coax the egg toward hatching. "Boss, you're here!" Kez jumped up, his voice bright. "Come quick, the egg's stirring." Stone went to the platform. The dark purple egg had grown since he'd last seen it. Silver patterns on its shell shone faintly in the mosslight. Tiny cracks webbed across the surface like a spider's silk. "Is it close?" Stone asked, excitement pricking at him. Arachnari giant spiders were sacred to the night goblins and deadly in battle. If it hatched and could be trained into a death crawler, the tribe's strength would jump. Kez nodded, almost reverent. "Yes, night goblins raise spiders all our lives. We know these signs. These cracks mean it will break free in at most half a month. He stroked the shell with the brush, careful not to harm it. Stone watched Kess's reverence and felt relief. Good thing the egg was in Night Goblin hands. If orcs had been in charge, they might have tossed it like a rock. Take care of it, Stone said. If you need more nutrient mix or anything special, tell me, and I'll have Yavdu bring it. I know, boss. Kess thumped his chest. Even if it costs my life, I won't let anything happen to the egg. The night goblins around him nodded, eyes bright with awe and honor. To tend a sacred beast's egg and watch it hatch was the highest privilege. Stone stood and looked at the web of cracks. Outside the cavern, the spring breeze pushed down the mine's ventilation shafts, carrying the clang of hammering and the orc boy's laughter. He breathed in the mingled scents of hot iron, earth, and phosphorescent moss. This was the spring of Blackrock Province, and the spring of the orcs rising. 69. Skarsnik dawn had only just broken, and the greenskins of Yadu were not fully awake. Only a few goblin scouts on night watch were yawning as they patrolled beside the wooden fence. Stone lay on the animal hide bed in the boss's house, sleeping soundly. He talked with Feluolai until late, and then stayed up thinking about ways to improve Ironhold's blacksmith shop, so he'd finally managed a rare, peaceful rest. What's all the noise about? A burst of raucous laughter from outside, like a pack of squigs shrieking in his ear, tore Stone out of his dreams. He snapped awake, grumpy, his green face hardening. Who dared make a racket while he was sleeping? Stone threw off the hide, rushed out bare-chested. The morning breeze carried a chill across his solid muscles, but it did nothing to cool his temper. He peered toward the sound and saw a huge crowd of greenskins gathered around the mushroom field. A dense mass, laughter and cheers, rising and falling. Even the goblins who usually tended the mushrooms had joined, leaving the field unattended. All of you, shut up! Stone roared, striding across the dew-soaked earth. The Peejing laborers passing by scattered in fear, and the scouts on patrol hunched their necks. No one wanted to face the boss when he woke like this. When Stone reached the edge of the mushroom field, the crowd still hadn't noticed his approach. He didn't say a word. He simply swung both huge fan-like palms. An orc boy on the left was flattened by a punch and tumbled into the crowd with an ouch. A goblin archer on the right was grabbed by the scruff of the neck and flung out before he could react. The greenskins scrambled back, clearing a path. Stone stomped into the center of the ring, ready to explode, but then he froze. Standing in the circle was a strange little night goblin, tiptoeing and holding up a purple mushroom, gesturing to the crowd. The gobbo was only about half a meter tall, shorter than most night goblins, with filthy dark green skin. His head was round and a little large, his eyes tiny and bright, and his flat nose and upward-turned mouth gave him the look of a fox who'd stolen a chicken. He wore a tattered cloak stitched from mushroom leaves and carried a bamboo basket stuffed with fungi, like some creature popped right out of the earth. "Look," he squeaked in a thin, sharp voice that somehow drew everyone in. "This purple one, don't just feed it to squigs. Grind it into powder and put it on arrowheads, and it's a sure hit every time. And this yellow one, roast it, it's fragrant. Dry it, grind it into flour, mix it into squig feed, and the squigs grow faster." The crowd leaned in, murmuring, "Oh," and "wow." Most of them had little education. They hadn't realized mushrooms could be used in so many ways. To them, this little gobbo must be some kind of genius. Stone frowned and stepped up to him. "Who are you? Where are you from? What are you shouting about here?" The little night goblin nearly dropped the purple mushroom. He looked up at the bare-chested giant before him, muscles like iron and eyes that could swallow someone whole, and took 2 terrified steps back. Then he gathered himself, puffed out his chest, and said proudly, "My name is Skarsnik. I was born from this mushroom field." "Born from the mushroom field?" Stone blinked. Greenskins did spring from spores, sure, but usually from rotten wood or mud. He'd never seen one say they came straight out of the fields. And Skarsnik looked odd, more sly and roguish than the usual night gob, practically an anomaly. Before Stone could figure it out, a voice sounded inside his head, a cold, clinical prompt that made the air feel electric. "Detected Special Hero Unit, Skarsnik, Night Goblins. Hero trait, Guardian of the Mushroom Field. Unlocked abilities. 1. All Tribe Mushroom Field yields permanently increased by 45%. 2. Unlocked new mushroom cultivation skill. Can cultivate poisonous mushrooms, high-yield edible mushrooms, squig-specific nutritional mushrooms, etc. 3. Unlocked squig mutation cultivation skill. Can induce squig mutation through mushroom feed to cultivate combat squigs with special abilities. Hero unit? Stone's eyes widened. His anger vanished and was with disbelief. This tiny, roguish gobbo was a hero? The mushroom field was the tribe's lifeline. Food, squig feed, night gob poison, orc fungal beer, all of it came from there. A permanent 45% yield boost meant the tribe could feed more mouths, raise more squigs, and strengthen logistics overnight. New mushroom types could mean deadlier poisons, bouncier food supplies, and squig mutations could produce combat squigs with special abilities. Skarsnik was a logistics and research prodigy. Stone's irritation melted into excitement. What did a weird look matter when someone could do that for the tribe? He forced on an overenthusiastic grin, stepped forward, and hugged Skarsnik so hard the little gobbo's legs kicked in the air. "Skarsnik, welcome to the Blackrock tribe. We've been waiting for you." Stone boomed. "From now on, you're our precious treasure." Skarsnik, squeezed until his face flushed, clutched at Stone's arm in a panic. This big greenskin had looked like he wanted to eat him a moment ago. Had he changed his mind? Breathless, Skarsnik managed. Boss, please let go. I can't breathe." Stone realized his mistake and let go, rubbing his head. Sorry. Too happy." The crowd was baffled. 1 minute the boss was lashing out, the next he was hugging a weird night goblin and grinning like a fool. The orc boys who'd taken Stone's blows looked particularly put out. Skarsnik patted his chest, still dazed, and then bowed awkwardly. Thank you, boss, for taking me in." "Taking you in? You grew from our mushroom fields. You're one of the Blackrock tribe." Stone clapped Skarsnik on the shoulder with too much force, nearly toppling him. "Crooked Mouth, get over here!" Crooked Mouth, watching the commotion, scurried up, scraping and bowing. "Boss, I'm here." "You show Skarsnik around Yadu," Stone ordered, leaving no room for argument. "Introduce him to the tribe's mushroom fields, the squig pens, and the green mushroom tavern. From today on, all the tribe's mushroom fields are under Skarsnik's management. Whatever mushrooms he wants to cultivate, whatever squig feed he wants to make, listen to him. Anyone who disobeys, I'll break his legs." Crooked Mouth glanced at Skarsnik's odd appearance, and then at Stone's dead serious face, and quickly nodded. "I understand, boss. I'll take good care of Big Brother Skarsnik." Skarsnik's jaw dropped. He'd expected to be treated like a laborer, but now he was being made manager of all the mushroom fields? He had been working with fungi his whole life. This was a dream. I'll do my best," he said, eyes bright with a mix of excitement and nerves. Stone nodded, then glanced at his bare chest as the morning wind nipped. "Take him around. I'm going back to put on something warm." He turned and jogged toward his house, his steps light like a gremlin who'd just snagged roasted meat. As Stone left, Crooked Mouth leaned close to Skarsnik with a grin. "Big Brother Skarsnik, shall I show you the fields? The boss values them more than anything." Skarsnik clutched his bamboo basket, mushrooms from the very patch he claimed to be born from, and followed Crooked Mouth toward the mushroom field. The crowd dispersed slowly, chattering as they went. "Who's that little runt? Why does the boss like him so much?" "No idea, but I heard he can make more mushrooms grow." "Really? Endless roasted mushrooms, then? Come on, let's see what he does with the fields." The morning sun rose over the grass of the mushroom field, catching Skarsnik's roguish little back. Stone, back inside, donned his animal hide armor and kept thinking of the implications. With this hero, the logistical foundation of Blackrock Province was suddenly rock solid. Morning sunlight filtered through the wooden window, spilling across the stone table in the chieftain's room and lighting the unfolded letter. Shito sat in the beast-hide chair, fingers curled around the paper's edge, eyes fixed on Feluole's dense, neat handwriting. He frowned slightly and sank into thought. This was the 7th letter Feluole had sent from Katushir Hold. 3 months earlier, Shito had dispatched night goblins mounted on death crawlers to escort Feluole to the main city of Katushir, an energetic river valley metropolis. Feluole had set out with 2 full chests of jewels and gold provided by Shito. In less than half a month, relying on the aristocratic manners he'd learned at the Earl of Coventry's mansion, and a merchant's instinct that far outpaced ordinary traders, he had insinuated himself into the city's noble circles and founded the Golden Rose Merchant Guild. By now, the Golden Rose Merchant Guild was a modestly famous caravan in Katushir, trading in silk, spices, and ore, but beneath its respectable facade, it carried the vital task of relaying intelligence back to Blackrock Province. Homing pigeons formed the communication bridge between the two places. Every 3 days, a gray pigeon wearing a copper leg ring took off from the Golden Rose Guild in Katushir, crossed the Howling Forest, and first landed at the vent above the Ironhold mine shaft, where Scarface kept watch. Scarface would open the letter first, skimming it using the few large greenskin characters and picture marks he could recognize. If he saw an urgent mark or something he didn't understand, he drew a charcoal circle on the edge of the page, scrawled a small note, usually questions like, "When is the iron ore being shipped?" or "What's the situation out here?" tied it to the pigeon's leg, and sent the bird on to Yadu. When the pigeon arrived, Shito read Feluole's report carefully, then used charcoal to write his reply, sometimes asking Feluole to check on iron distribution in Prince Patton's fiefdom, sometimes instructing him to watch troop movements around Katushir Hold. He folded the letter, attached it to the pigeon's leg, and sent it back along the same route. The pigeon route had proved remarkably reliable, 3 months without failure. Because of it, Shito was no longer the green-skinned chieftain limited to the Howling Forest's borders. He could learn almost immediately about disturbances in the border fiefdoms and even major events in far-off nations like the Empire and Britannia through Feluole's dispatches. Where he once groped in the dark and guessed at the origin of human caravans, he could now stand back and watch the continent's tides, calculating how Blackrock Province should exploit them. The security of that vantage filled him with a calm certainty. He read on. Feluole's handwriting, elegant in the style of a noble youth, detailed several earth-shaking events in the Northern Empire this year, events that could reshape the old world. Early this year, Emperor Dieter IV of the Empire secretly accepted a large sum of gold from the Marienburg City Council, Shito murmured, tapping the name Marienburg. He knew Marienburg was the Empire's richest port, a city flush with sea trade that had long flirted with independence. To accept its gold and agree to its independence seemed madness, unless, as everyone whispered, Dieter IV had grown weak. Feluole reported that Marienburg had paid Dieter IV 500,000 gold coins and promised annual protection fees in exchange for recognition as a free city-state outside imperial law. The Empire's coffers had been bled dry by last year's WOG under the greenskin warlord Grumlock, and Dieter, desperate for funds, had signed a secret treaty. The secret, however, did not stay secret. Elector Count Wilhelm III of Reichland, who already despised Dieter IV, exposed the treaty and circulated copies among the elector counts. The Empire erupted with outrage. Electors denounced Dieter for betraying imperial interests. Nobles were shamed, and commoners cursed him on the streets. 5 months later, Dieter IV was forced to abdicate by the elector counts, Shito read, and couldn't help laughing at the pathetic speed of the downfall. The throne lost almost as soon as the gold warmed the emperor's hands. Feluole even joked that when Dieter IV left the palace in Nuln, he sneaked out the back so hurriedly the palace guards hadn't even bothered to salute him, escaping with only some of his belongings. The throne passed to Wilhelm III, a far sterner man. His first 2 moves on taking power were decisive. He annulled the Dutter-Marienburg Agreement, declaring Marienburg forever imperial territory, and he shifted the imperial capital from Nuln to Altdorf, Reichland's seat. Marienburg, however, had already raised its own army based on its port wealth and openly ignored Wilhelm's declaration. The situation remained at a deadlock. Feluole noted that Wilhelm's relocation of the capital was presented as a strategic necessity. Altdorf was supposedly easier to defend against greenskin and chaos incursions, but in truth, it cemented his power. By basing the court in his home territory, Wilhelm secured loyal nobles and troops and made his grip on the throne firmer. The move only deepened the empire's chaos. Other elector counts, already wary of Wilhelm's ambition, felt increasingly sidelined and began hoarding grain and troops, outwardly acquiescent, but privately pursuing their own aims. Except for Reichland and Ostland, many fiefdoms were already behaving like independent kingdoms. Imperial taxes could barely be collected. Shito tapped the stone table, calculating. The disorder in the empire was both an opportunity and a threat for Blackrock Province. The upside, the empire's weakness meant the border regions would be neglected, giving him a chance to expand his influence and subdue more green-skinned tribes. The downside, if the empire splintered, chaos forces to the north might press south, or ambitious elector counts might send armies to seize border resources. I must speed up ore extraction at Ironhold, and Skarsnik's mushroom fields need to produce more, he said to himself. Weapons and food were the only sure defenses against whatever storms approached. He picked up a charcoal and wrote his reply on the back of Feluole's letter. Continue monitoring the Marienburg Empire conflict. Inquire more about movements from the Earl of Coventry in Prince Patton's fiefdom. Try to procure a few human smiths from Catashir Hold. Then he folded the letter and stepped to the window, whistling. A gray pigeon fluttered down from the roof and settled on his shoulder. Shitu tied the note to its leg ring, stroked its feathers, and said, "Send it back." The pigeon cooed twice, unfurled its wings, and rose into the sky until it became a small black dot heading toward the howling forest. Sunlight filled the room. Shitu watched the greenskins below, orc boys hauling iron ore from Ironhold, goblins harvesting mushrooms in the fields, Skarsnik squatting at the field edge, holding a yellow mushroom and studying it with his usual peculiar intensity. The Empire's upheaval was a distant storm moving toward the border, but Shito knew that with a solid foundation of weapons, food, and fighting strength, Blackrock Province could carve out its own territory in the chaos. He breathed in the sharp, earthen scent of mushrooms and the rhythmic clink of hammering coming from the blacksmith shop. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed another scrap of intelligence. 71. Black Cloth Brotherhood. The letter on the stone table still held the residual warmth of the pigeon's wings. Stone traced the words with a finger, pausing on another piece of intelligence Feluole had sent. This news from Howling Forest caught him more than the changing of the imperial throne. Deep within Howling Forest, another force has taken root, the Black Cloth Brotherhood, a large thieves' guild from Kabsanaki territory. They slipped in through the northern gate, bypassed Katushir's triple outposts and patrols, and are now hidden on the western side of the forest. Stone's brow tightened when he reached the name Black Cloth Brotherhood. He had been watching Howling Forest for a long time, and yet had not seen this move coming. These thieves were clearly skilled at concealment. Feluole's letter described them in detail, nearly 1,000 strong, mostly deserters, vagrants, and bankrupt merchants. Their gear was pitifully crude, ragged burlap for clothing, makeshift weapons like sharpened sticks and rusty daggers. Yet despite the poor equipment, they had thrown the Howling Trail trade route into chaos. Howling Trail was the only road from Katushir Hold to Prince Patton's fiefdom. In previous years, caravans were endless. Carts piled with silk, spices, and iron ore formed long lines. Since the arrival of the Black Cloth Brotherhood, caravans were repeatedly attacked. Last month, 3 Batagania wine caravans were robbed, their guards cut down and their bodies left for the beasts. Last week, an iron ore caravan from Katushir vanished in the forest, leaving only bloodstains and broken reins. 7 or 8 out of 10 caravans are attacked. Howling Trail is now rarely used. Stone read the report and worried. Fewer caravans meant fewer targets for ambushes later, which was bad for his plans. What troubled the Lord of Katushir more was that the Hold had tried and failed to deal with them 3 times. The first operation sent 200 militiamen. They were led into a swamp and walked into traps, suffering over half casualties. The second effort was led by knights, but was ambushed in the dense woods with rolling stones and poisoned arrows. Many mounts were shot down, and the knights retreated. The third time they massed 500 men and sealed off the western side of the forest, only to find the Brotherhood had vanished, burrowing into pre-dug tunnels and melting away like groundhogs. They knew the woods too well. Springs, shortcuts, hideouts. Katushir's troops could not catch them. Feluole's tone in the letter had an opportunistic edge. He asked permission to lead troops against the Brotherhood on the condition that, after the operation, The Lord recommended him to the Catastrophe Council as trade inspector, responsible for the Howling Trail. Trade inspector wasn't a high title, but it would give him official control over the trade route. If Falule secured that post, iron ore and dried mushrooms from Blackrock Province could move into Catastrophe with far fewer middlemen. Under the pretext of protecting caravans, the Greenskins could even operate openly on the route instead of ambushing covertly. Falule explicitly promised, "If I get the position, your subordinate can use the trade route to transport iron ingots, forging tools, and even human blacksmiths into Blackrock Province, on condition that the boss approves sending troops to eliminate the Black Cloth Brotherhood." Stone leaned back in the beastskin chair, fingers drumming on the stone. He ran the pros and cons through his head. Pros: installing an ally inside Catastrophe would give them human resources and intelligence. Clearing the Brotherhood would reopen the route both for resumed ambushes and for sanctioned trade under Faluole's authority. The Brotherhood, though nearly 1,000, were a disorganized rabble whose crude weapons and lack of discipline made them an easy target for Blackrock forces. Cons: sending troops might cause casualties. Stone dismissed that. Greenskins grew stronger in battle, and any losses could be replenished. Plus, the loot seized from the thieves could bolster tribal coffers. "The benefits outweigh the drawbacks. We can definitely do it," Stone said, slamming his hand on the table. He favored fights that came with plausible deniability. Helping an ally get promoted and clearing trade routes were perfect covers. He stood and walked to the wall where a charcoal population chart hung, scribbled by a goblin scout and slightly crooked but accurate enough. He preferred the system panel these days. Thinking it, a pale blue curtain shimmered into view. Black Province population statistics. Orc boys 242, including 150 melee orcs and 92 archers. Night goblins 371, including 210 deathcrawler riders and 161 poisoned archers. Goblins 986, including 110 archers, 123 spearmen, and 753 laborers artisans, among them 32 technicians in Big Valley's team. Gretchen 2,843, used for logistics and transport. Some can operate Gretchen pump carts. Total 4,042. Stone's lips curved into a smile. Nearly 4,500 greenskins against a band of 1,000 thieves was overkill. The orc boys could smash through lines. The night goblins excelled at forest ambushes and hiding in woods better than the Brotherhood. Goblin archers could pin enemies from range, and squigs could handle pump carts for supply and rudimentary fortifications. They also had secret advantages. Poisonous mushroom powder cultivated by Skarsnik could be dusted on arrowheads to paralyze foes. Newly forged iron axes and spears from Ironhold, though crude, were heavy enough to shatter a thief's wooden club. 50 Gretchen pump carts could haul troops or charge as makeshift chariots on open ground. "This Black Cloth Brotherhood has wandered into a trap," Stone murmured, closing the panel. He went to the window and looked toward Howling Forest. Sunlight sifted through the leaves, casting dappled shadows. No one would guess the peaceful wood was about to host a brutal clash between greenskins and thieves. He returned to the table, picked up a charcoal pencil, and wrote a reply on the back of Faluole's letter. "Agree to send troops. Within 3 days, I will dispatch Bone Tree with 100 orc boys and 200 night goblin poisoned archers, led by Kess with death crawlers to guide them, to infiltrate the western side of the forest and rendezvous with you. Specific encirclement and suppression plans will be discussed when we meet. Also, mark a map of the Black Cloth Brotherhood's activity area in advance, including camps and tunnel locations." He folded the letter, blew his whistle, and the gray pigeon on the roof fluttered down. Stone tied the reply to its leg ring and tossed it skyward. The bird beat through the morning mist and vanished toward Catastrophe. Stone drew a deep breath in the doorway. The air, besides the mushroom scent, carried a faint tang of gunpowder. A new battle was imminent, one that would let Faluolai cement a position in Catastrophe and quietly extend Blackrock Province's reach into the human trade network. In the distance, the orc boys roared from the fighting pit. Skarsnik squatted in the mushroom beds, turning a purple poisonous fungus over in his hands, scheming new uses. From Ironhold, the ring of hammers sounded as another batch of iron axes was forged. The gears of Blackrock tribe were turning fast with the shifting world. Eliminating the Black Cloth Brotherhood was only one step in Stone's plan. He sought not just control of Howling Forest, but to use Feluale as a conduit to stretch Blackrock Province's influence deeper into the human world. 72. Black Cloth Brotherhood 2. The moment he stepped out of the boss's wooden door, a thunderous roar slammed into his ears. Dust billowed from the fighting pit, and a seething mass of green skins pressed around it like squigs swarming a roast. Their laughter and shouts made Yadu's flimsy palisade tremble. Shito followed the noise, and before he reached the pit, saw two orc boys stripped to the waist grappling in the mud. The one on the left, his face a map of scars, clamped a rock in his hand and smashed it down onto his rival's shoulder, making him howl. The other simply leapt on top, grabbed his waist, and hurled him onto the ground. They rolled, punching and kicking on the slick earth, faces and torsos streaked with blood, and grew ever more frenzied, roaring, "Wah!" and "Smash you!" The crowd around the pit watched with glittering eyes. Some waved stone axes, some slapped their thighs and cheered, and a few goblins had clambered up a crooked tree to peer in. The Gretchen were packed at the very edge, craning their necks, their tiny faces full of adoration. In the world of green skins, strength decides everything. The victor is a hero. Shitu stood at the rim with his arms folded, watching. The tribe had been busy mining, farming, and building a blacksmith shop for months. It had been nearly half a year since they'd had a proper scrap. War blood runs in green skins' veins. They feel uneasy without a fight, so they settled for the pit, letting off steam on each other. Every orc boy present had red eyes, knuckles cracking, brimming with pent-up rage. "Everyone stop!" Shito's voice split the chaos like a thunderclap. The two fighters froze, and before they knew what hit them, Shito grabbed them by the scruffs and flung them out of the pit like squirming pullets. The surrounding crowd fell silent, all heads turning toward the boss at the edge of the ring, puzzled. Why stop the fight? "Gather round! I've got something to say." Shito leapt onto the dirt slope beside the pit and shouted. The green skins surged forward, orc boys shoved to the front, goblins and night goblins clustered in the middle, and the Gretchen were squashed at the back, forming a tight ring. Even Skarsnik, from the distant mushroom fields, poked his head in, still clutching half a poisonous mushroom. Shito looked over the packed crowd. A crooked grin spread across his green face as he roused them with a deliberately inciting tone. "Don't you feel fighting in the pit ain't enough?" "Yes!" the boys roared, shaking leaves from the trees. "Don't you want a real scrap? To grab more stuff? To show everyone how strong Blackrock tribe is?" Shito fed the fire. "Want that? Want more?" Whack! The greenskins surged, weapons waving, eyes blazing. Satisfied, Shito opened his arms and his voice rolled over Yadu like thunder. "I've got good news. We're gonna have a big what?" The crowd exploded. Boys flung axes into the air. Goblins jumped and squealed. Even the Gretchen managed a small, fanatic whack. "Quiet, listen." Shito pressed his hands down and, when the noise died a little, went on. "A pack of foolish human thieves calling themselves the Black Cloth Brotherhood have moved into the Howling Forest, nearly 1,000 of them. They rob caravans, grab territory, and have turned the Howling Trail into chaos." He let the words hang and watched the fierceness sharpen in their eyes. "They've taken what should belong to us, occupied our forests. Can we stand for that?" "No," the greenskins answered like one voice. Several orcs tried to charge out, then were held back by companions. "I've decided. 3 days from now, I'm leading you into the forest to wipe those thieves out. We'll take back what's ours. We'll smash their camp to pieces. We'll show them whose forest this is. We'll teach them what it means to offend the Blackrock tribe. Wipe 'em out. Loot 'em all." The boys roared until their throats were raw. Night goblins excitedly rode their small spiders in circles through the crowd, poisoned bows already knocked. Ambushes were their specialty. Hunting thieves would be easier than fighting a proper human army. Shito let them run on. "If we win, we don't just steal their goods. We make the humans of Katushir bring us iron and grain. Our axes will be sharper, our squigs stronger. We'll be ready for even bigger fights. Walk to our heart's content." "Walk!" The cries rolled across Yadu, even reaching the orcs hammering in Ironhold, who paused to cock an ear with envy. A proper battle was coming. Shito raised a hand and calmed them. When the cheering faded, he barked, "Bone Tree! Kess, get over here!" Bone Tree, still waving his stone axe, pushed through the crowd and grinned with raw excitement. "Boss, want me to lead the boys as vanguard?" Kez arrived on his death crawler, his black spider silk cloak snapping in the breeze, eyes bright. "Boss, the night goblins are ready. We'll pepper the thieves with holes." Shito ignored their eagerness and motioned them inside the boss's hut. "Come in. We'll plan." They hustled in. Outside, the greenskins drifted into small knots, buzzing about who'd get the most loot, who'd stab the most thieves. Inside, Shito closed the door and pointed to a crude map laid on the stone table. Feluole had sent it earlier. The thick black line marked the Howling Trail. A red circle showed where the Black Cloth Brotherhood lurked. Small crosses noted places where Katushir's army had been caught out. Feluole reports nearly 1,000 of them, poorly equipped but deadly familiar with the forest. "They've dug tunnels and set traps," Shito said gravely, tapping the red circle. "They're hiding near the western swamp, using the marsh and dense woods for guerrilla tactics. Katushir's troops kept taking losses because they didn't know the terrain." Bone Tree scratched his head. "So what? We know the forest too. I'll lead 100 boys in with one axe each and mash 'em into meat paste." "Don't be stupid," Shito snapped. "They may be weak, but there are a lot of them. They'll hide and rain arrows on anyone who rushes in. If we charge blindly, the boys will get hurt. We want to win, not die." Kess nodded. "Boss is right. Night goblins are good at sneaking. We should scout first, find their camp, tunnels, and traps." Shito smiled in approval. "Exactly. The operation has 3 steps." He laid out the plan with a finger on the map. Step 1, reconnaissance. Kez, take 50 night goblins on death crawlers tomorrow morning and sneak into the west side. Find the camp layout, guard posts, tunnel entrances, and traps near the swamp. Mark everything. Be quiet. Don't get seen. Kez bowed. "Got it. I'll get a clear picture." Step 2, frontal diversion. Shito pointed at Bone Tree. "Bone Tree, you take 100 orc boys and 50 goblin spearmen and march ostentatiously down the Howling Trail the day after tomorrow. Make a show like you're surrounding the thieves to draw their attention. Don't charge, just lure them. Once their main force comes out, fall back and lead them to our chosen battlefield." Bone Tree hesitated. "Only lure? No chopping?" "Less nonsense," Shito rapped him on the head. "If you scare them off, who's to blame? Once they're in our trap, there'll be plenty to chop." Bone Tree grinned and saluted. "I'll make sure they come." Step 3, ambush. Shito tapped a patch of pine on the map. "High ground, low scrub, perfect for an ambush. Kess, take the rest of the night goblins, 200, and set up there. Coat your arrowheads with Skarsnik's mushroom poison. When Bone Tree draws them in, you'll fire first to break their lines." He continued, "Then Bone Tree, your boys charge the front, while Kess's goblins swing in from both flanks, trapping them in the pines. The Gretchen will push the pump carts around the perimeter to block tunnels. Those carts are full of stones. If you see a tunnel mouth, shove stones in it and seal their escape." Both men nodded, buzzing with excitement. The plan promised a proper scrap with less risk. "One thing," Shito emphasized, staring at them. "No freelancing. Follow orders. Bone Tree, if you lead a stupid charge, I'll throw away your stone axe and make you fight with a wooden stick. Kess, if you let the night goblins be seen, I'll take your death crawler and make you walk back to Yadu." Both snapped to attention. "We wouldn't dare," they said. Shito patted their shoulders. "Good. Get ready. Bone Tree, go to Ironhold and pick the 100 strongest boys. Kess, arrange the reconnaissance and fetch some of Skarsnik's mushroom powder. Meet at Yadu's entrance the day after tomorrow morning." "Yes!" they roared together and ran off, springy with joy. A big battle at last. Shito walked to the window and pushed it open. Outside, the greenskins still clamored. 2 more fighters were already at it in the pit, cheers rising and falling. He smiled. These restless creatures finally had something to pour their hunger into. This wag against the Black Cloth Brotherhood would not only reopen the Howling Trail and strengthen Feluole, it would let the Blackrock tribe taste blood and power again. Sunlight slid across the map and rested on the red circle. In 3 days, Shito thought, the forest would run red. That baptism of blood and fire would be Blackrock Province's first step toward a wider world. On the edge of the muddy swamp northeast of the howling forest, fetid moisture mixed with the sour smell of wild vegetable soup hung heavy in the air. The Black Cloth Brotherhood's camp was scattered across the clearing beside the swamp like a pile of discarded rags. Low tents of moldy burlap and bark leaned awkwardly. Some were only frames of branches draped with tattered hides. Campfires burned in fits and starts among the tents, pots of wild vegetable soup bubbling with unidentifiable roots bobbing on the surface. Several ragged thieves hunched around one of the fires, staring hungrily at the pot, ladling out scraps with a wooden spoon, blowing on the hot broth and shoving it into their mouths. Nearly 1,000 of them were squeezed into the small clearing, gaunt men with sallow faces, wearing patched burlap or nothing at all, their skins streaked with grime and old blood. Their weapons were a sad testament to their poverty: short knives rusted beyond recognition, sharpened sticks, smoothed stones. Only a handful, evidently minor leaders, wore crude leather armor, scimitars at their belts, leaning against tent poles and glaring at the others with a fierceness that tried to pass for authority. In the center of the camp, a dozen thieves shoved and jostled around a pile of stolen goods. A faded piece of silk had been torn in two. Two men clutched the halves, faces flushed with rage, cursing and ready to come to blows. Nearby, several more rifled the contents of a wooden box, moldy bread, a tiny jar of honey, a few copper coins, stuffing the meager haul into their arms like wolves, terrified someone would snatch it away. "I saw this jar of honey first," a bearded thief roared, smashing his fist into the face of the man beside him. "Bullshit! Whoever grabs it keeps it." The struck man grabbed a wooden stick and swung. Instead of breaking up the fight, the bystanders surged around them, cheering, "Fight! Kill him! Grab the honey and give me a share." The noise rose and fell in a hideous chorus. The camp was a boiling cesspool of greed, vulgarity, and despair. Most of these men were desperate, refugees driven into destitution or deserters from the army. They gathered only for food. Discipline was non-existent. The winners ate a little more. The losers curled up in a corner of a tent and starved. Amid this chaos, one tent stood out, 3 times larger than the rest, cut from coarse black burlap with leather patches along the seams. It had the unmistakable aura of leadership. 2 leather-armored men stood at its entrance, scimitars in hand, driving anyone who came within half a step away. Inside, a fire crackled and threw light on a man seated on a beast-hide cushion. He was about 40, fleshy-faced, with a long, ugly scar running from his forehead to his chin along his left cheek. He wore a relatively intact leather cuirass, a rusty longsword tucked into his belt. This was Kasha, leader of the Black Cloth Brotherhood. Before him stood a man in a gray cloak, hood low enough to hide most of his face. Only stubble on his chin and a pair of flat, emotionless eyes were visible. Kasha gripped a ceramic cup so hard his knuckles went white, his voice thick with indignation. "Prince Patton's men promised that if I led my brothers in an uprising against the nobles of Kabsanaki territory, they'd send troops to coordinate the assault. Where are they now? I led my brothers, fled from the northern gate to this cursed place, chased like dogs by Katushir's men, and they haven't even shown a shadow. Why?" The man in the gray cloak gave a soft cough. His voice was calm and flat as stagnant water. "Plans change. The nobles of Kabsanaki have reinforced their defenses and hired imperial mercenaries. If troops move now, it would only be a net loss." "A net loss?" Kasha sprang up and kicked the low table, sending the ceramic cup smashing to the dirt. "Do you know what we paid to escape Katushir's checkpoints? Over a dozen brothers died falling from cliffs to get past their triple patrols. We hid in the swamp 3 days and 3 nights to avoid the mountain search teams, nearly eaten alive by insects. And you tell me plans change?" He grew angrier as he spoke, the scar in his face twitching. "We robbed caravans, killed guards, threw the howling trail into chaos. Wasn't that supposed to draw their attention for Prince Patton? And what did you do? Hide behind the curtain and watch. My brothers are starving. If this goes on, Katushir won't need to kill us. Hunger will." The man in the gray cloak did not flinch. Calmly, he reached into his cloak, produced a heavy cloth bag from his chest, and tossed it onto the ground before Kasha. The bag thudded and spilled a sound that meant coin. We will triple the payment we arranged, he said, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. We will also send 50 sacks of grain, 20 scimitars, and 100 spears each month. That should keep your brothers alive. Kasha's eyes dropped to the bag, his fury deflated as greed replaced it. He crouched, hefted the bag, and a greedy smile split his face. Now you're talking. If you'd said that sooner, I wouldn't have had to get worked up. The man in the gray cloak inclined his head. Next, you will continue to hold the Howling Forest. The Howling Trail is Katushirhold's lifeline. The tighter you strangle the trade route, the worse Katushir's economy will suffer. That opening will let Prince Patton's forces move in. When the time is right, we will help you return, overthrow the nobles of Kabsanaki, and make you Lord of Kabsanaki. Good. We'll do it. Kasha's eyes narrowed with the look of a man already imagining his title. He picked up the broken cup, rinsed it in a basin of water, offered it to the man in the gray cloak. Drink. Let's go over how we're going to close the trail. They spoke in low tones, laying plans, oblivious to the fact that a silent hunt had already begun in the surrounding wood. In the dense trees to the east, 3 lookouts leaned against trunks, smoking. Ragged burlap, sharpened sticks, idle chatter. Their talk was the same as every night. Standing guard here all day. I haven't seen a woman in weeks, a short thief complained, flicking away his cigarette butt. The girl we grabbed from the last caravan was a catch, but the boss's men took her. We didn't even get a taste. Next caravan we raid. We move first and take a few women for ourselves, a tall thief said with a leer. Ha! You wish. A faint rustle cut them off. Before the 3 could turn, 3 dark shapes exploded from the undergrowth. 3 night goblins riding 3-meter-tall death crawlers. The black spiders glided to the trees without a sound. The goblins dropped to the ground, bone daggers flashing, hands clamping over mouths. Struggles were brief and muffled. Throat blades flashed, blood spurted in dark arcs against the tree bark. In moments, the 3 bodies slumped with eyes wide and glossed. The goblins dragged them out of sight, covered them with leaves, remounted their mounts, and vanished into shadow, leaving only the faint metallic tang of blood in the air. On the camp's western edge, 2 sentries crouched in the grass, watching the swamp, confident their concealment would go unnoticed. In the trees behind them, several goblins had crept closer, feet as light as cats. Hemp ropes and bone daggers gleamed in the gloom. One sentry felt a rough hand clamp his mouth and was pulled backward. Before he could fully react, a dagger plunged into his back and through his heart. The other felt a rope seize his throat. It tightened until his face purpled and went slack. In less than half an hour, the dozen or so overt and hidden sentries around the camp had been quietly eliminated. No screams, no alarm. These men had simply ceased to exist. More death crawlers rose from the woods like a night tide. The spiders' black carapaces glinted coldly in the moonlight. Their 8 barbed legs touched the fallen leaves without a sound. Night goblins hunched on their backs, poisoned arrows knocked in their bows. The arrowheads were smeared with a dark purple mushroom powder that gleamed with a sickly sheen in the dark. A vast black net of death crawlers spread, slipping behind trunks into the grass, along the swamp slopes, eyes fixed on the disorderly camp. At the flick of a leader's hand, poisoned arrows would rain down and turn the camp into a blood-soaked pincushion. Inside Kasha's tent, the 2 men still spoke of titles and blockades, unaware that the shadow of death had settled over the camp. Outside, the thieves fought over, laughed, cursed, and shouted. None noticed that the surrounding forest had fallen unnaturally silent. No insects chirped, no birds called, their own voices suddenly harsh in the still air. The night wind ran across the swamp, carrying the fetid damp and stirring the dark cloaks of the night goblins in the trees. Like patient hunters, they waited for their leader, Kez, to give the signal, waiting for a baptism of blood and fire that would wipe this chaotic camp from the howling forest. On the gravel road of Howling Trail, heavy footsteps made the ground shiver. Bone Tree marched at the head, bare-chested, a crude iron axe nearly half his height balanced on his shoulder. Its blade still bore the filings of last night's sharpening. Behind him came 100 orc boys in rough iron breastplates hammered from single sheets, edges jagged, shoulder plates riveted to the cuirasses and clanking as they walked. 50 goblin lads followed in lighter leather armor, spears in hand, their short legs churning. Wah! Charge! Bone Tree's roar rolled through the trees like thunder. The orc boys answered in a single volley of bellowing cries, raising axes and round shields and breaking into a thunderous run toward the Black Cloth Brotherhood's camp. They made their armor clang and shouted loud enough to send birds flapping from the roadside. Exactly the show Stone had ordered, a brazen feint to make sure the Brotherhood saw them immediately. Let those human thieves see the might of the Blackrock tribe, one orc called, slapping up his shield. When we charge, I'll cut down 10, another snarled, eyes alight. Even the timid goblin lads were swept up in the momentum, howling and brandishing spears as they went. Chaos had already broken out in the Brotherhood camp. A few thieves had just finished grabbing a bag of bread and were squatting to divide the spoil when the line of green-skinned figures came into view. Bread tumbled from shaking hands. "Green skins! Green skins!" a thief shrieked. The camp dissolved into panic. Some threw down what they carried and dove for tents. Others snatched weapons. A few quick-witted ones scooped up scattered goods and bolted toward the swamp, convinced the greenskins would steal their loot first. "Everyone stop! Form ranks!" A small leader in leather armor bellowed, waving a scimitar, but no one listened. The thieves were a disorderly bunch, and when danger came, they thought first of themselves. Kasha pushed the man in the gray cloak in front of him and burst from his tent. From the flap, he saw the dark, charging mass, and his face went white with rage. "Where were the sentries? Who is dead?" he roared, seizing a trembling thief. "The greenskins are at our door, and you only just noticed. A pack of freeloading good-for-nothings." "Lee, leader," the thief stammered, eyes wide. "The brothers at the outpost didn't return to report. We didn't know." Kasha shoved him aside, drew his longsword, and shouted over the growing din. "Quiet. If you want to live, grab your weapons and hold the high ground." His fury steadied them. The thieves glanced at the charging tide, then at Kasha's blazing eyes, and slowly the scramble turned to action. They couldn't run. They could only fight. Under the orders of a few small leaders, they seized arms and scrambled for the camp's rim. The Brotherhood's camp sat on a rise by the swamp, roughly 10 meters above Howling Trail, a naturally defensible position. The earthen slope at the edge formed a barrier. The thieves were poorly equipped, but they had many archers and crossbowmen, around 200, some with homemade longbows, with others with rusty crossbows, now lying prone along the slope, knocking and drawing, taking aim. "Hold steady. Wait until they're close." Kasha stood at the center of the ridge, brandishing his sword. The high ground was easy to defend. If the archers and crossbowmen could keep the attackers below the slope, the greenskins would break off. The man in the gray cloak stepped out behind him, hood low, expression unreadable, his fingers rubbing the edge of his cloak as he watched the approaching horde. Bone Tree led the greenskins across the flat below the rise. When they were about 50 paces out, Kasha dropped his sword point and shouted, "Fire!" Whoosh! 200 arrows poured out, a black rain sweeping toward the attackers. The arrows screamed through the air, many arcing for the orcs' chests, some skimming for the smaller goblins. "Shields up!" Bone Tree barked. His round shield, hammered from thick iron with a riveted rim, rose first. The orc boys lifted shields in unison, 100 circles of iron locked into an armored wall. The goblin lads crouched behind, pushing spears through the gaps, almost hidden behind the hulking orcs. Bang! The volley hit the iron wall with a wet, metallic clatter. Many arrows glanced off and fell. Others struck between shields, but were stopped by iron cuirasses, leaving shallow dents. A few flew over the defenses and struck the goblin lads. One cried out as an arrow pierced his arm, but he still thrust forward. An orc boy felt an arrow scrape his leg and blood ran, but he grinned, wiped the wound, and roared up at the slope. "Is that all you've got? Just tickling us." The greenskins fed on blood and noise. Wounds only stirred their fury. They slapped shields and bellowed up at the thieves, taunting, "Come down and fight! I'll break your bows and shove them up your arses." Kasha's face went harder. He hadn't expected their armor to stand up so well to arrows. "Keep shooting. Don't stop," he shouted. "Aim for legs. Aim for eyes." The shooters angled again and loosed another storm. The orc shields came down lower, covering legs, and arrow after arrow struck steel or rimmed earth, doing little. Bone Tree watched, impatience flashing in his eyes. He turned to the ranks behind him and roared, "Form up, charge with me. Chop these human thieves into meat." They answered in a single savage chorus and tightened their formation. The front line held shields. The rear lines raised axes, ready to hack through any gap. The goblin lads huddled in the middle with spears poised. Wah! The war cry rolled up the trail as the shield wall began to advance. Heavy footfalls thundered toward the earthen slope. The roar shook the thieves on the ridge. Some bow hands trembled. Kasha gripped his sword until his palms were slick. He watched that iron wall approach and for the first time felt unease. These green skins had discipline, armor, a bloodlust that did not fear death. Behind him, the man in the gray cloak's mouth lifted in a barely there smile. He looked toward the silent, dense forest beyond the rise. Though nothing moved, he felt eyes in the shadow, waiting to strike the brothers below. The orc shield wall closed to 20 paces. They could make out the frightened faces on the high ground. Some orc boys waved axes and made faces at the thieves. Bone Tree kept his gaze fixed on Kasha. This was Stone's plan. Draw the thieves out and push them toward the pine forest to meet Kez's ambush. The arrow storms thinned. The thieves were running out of bolts and arrows. The green-skin shield wall reached the foot of the earthen slope. Below the dirt slope at the edge of the highland, the ground shuddered with the advance of the orc boy's shield wall. Kasha's hand clenched his longsword so hard the veins stood out in his forearm. He spun and shouted at the men behind him. Main force! Hold the line! Form a linear formation! Over 500 men from the Black Cloth Brotherhood's main force moved as one. These were Kasha's best fighters, mostly in tanned leather, a few leaders in chainmail looted from Imperial deserters. They carried scimitars and iron swords. About 20 of them hefted crude halberds. Under the cries of junior officers, they formed a long horizontal line along the highland's rim, blades forward, shields angled upward, wood reinforced with iron sheets, creating an almost impenetrable barrier. The linear formation, once a tactic for decisive battles on open plains, worked well here. The dirt slope funneled the greenskins' charge, and the horizontal line blocked every gap like an iron clamp, wedged on the enemy's only approach. Drive the stragglers back. Everyone who can fight, take a weapon. Those who can't, pick up stones. Kasha barked at the refugees behind him. In the camp's rear, ragged thieves still cowered. Some clutched bundles of plunder and had tried to slip into the swamp. Kasha's personal guard shoved them forward, forcing them to take up sticks and stones. They were crowded behind the main line now, human shields in front of the thieves' real fighters. Kasha wiped sweat from his face, breathing hard and angrily. He had been a pawn backed by Prince Barton's fief, meant to stir trouble in Kubsanaki territory. How had he ended up pinned on a howling forest highland, fighting to the death against a horde of green skins? Weren't the dwarves supposed to have cleared most of them away years ago? And why were these so well equipped, wearing iron armor and formed into ranks? A dull thud snapped him back. The greenskins' shield wall had smashed into the thieves' line. Orc boys, round shields held high, slammed into wooden shields. The frontline thieves stumbled 2 steps back. Scimitars nearly slipped from their hands. Bone Tree shoved his head over the orc shields and brought a crude iron axe down toward a thief's shoulder. The man lifted his shield to block, and with a crack the wood split. The axe kept moving and cleaved into flesh. Blood spurted. Like a pack of enraged squigs, the greenskins pressed up the slope. Their round shields shoved at the thieves' defense. Iron axes jabbed through gaps, each thrust to kill. Some orcs abandoned their shields to grapple and roll, their thick skin and iron armor shrugging off scimitar cuts that only left shallow marks. But a single solid blow from a greenskin shattered ribs. Over 500 main force thieves were pushed back by just over 100 orc boys. These thieves were a scattered rabble, living by plunder. How could they have withstood such a suicidal onslaught? With a few frontline men cut down, those behind faltered and gaps opened in the line. Hold! Whoever retreats, I'll cut them down! Kasha shouted, swinging to cut down a thief trying to flee. Blood spattered his face, but it did nothing to stop the formation from loosening. Orcs with pierced arms still gritted their teeth and drove axes into thieves' throats. Goblin lads crawled under orcs to stab calves with short spears. A Gretchen had somehow snagged a thief's leg and bit until the man screamed. It was not a battle so much as a feeding frenzy. Just as the Highland line teetered on collapse, a sudden whooshing came from the rear of the camp. Dense, urgent, an eerie whistle unlike anything thieves ever used. Kasha's stomach dropped. He turned and saw a pack of dark figures bursting from the swamp-fringed forest. Night goblins mounted on 3-meter death crawlers. The giant spiders plowed through the mud, leaping toward the camp. The night goblins crouched on their backs, short bows thudding out a steady rain of arrows. Dark purple-tipped shafts arced and found the refugees and rearguard thieves with terrible accuracy. "Poison," someone shouted as a thief hit by an arrow felt his arm go numb, his strength gone. His scimitar clanged to the ground, and he convulsed, frothing at the mouth before going still. Panic spread like wildfire. The refugees who served as shields were already cowed. Struck by poison arrows, they fled for the center of the highland, trampling and breaking the thieves' rear ranks. Even the main force wavered. Some turned to face the night goblins, others tried to fall back. The once orderly line disintegrated into disorder. They can do this? Kasha could hardly think. These greenskins used tactics, flanking, poison volleys, nothing like the simple berserk charges he remembered. "Leader Kasha, if we don't act, we'll all die," the man in the gray cloak said beside him. He had appeared without Kasha noticing. His voice was calm, but threaded with a quiet urgency. Kasha seized his arm, eyes burning. "Stop pretending. Bring out your big treasure, now, or we're finished." He had long suspected this envoy from Prince Barton's fief carried some secret weapon. Why else come here with only a dozen men? The man in the gray cloak did not resist. He nodded and motioned to the men behind the tents. A dozen figures in black, tight-fitting suits came forward, pushing a large object draped in a black cloth. It stood about half a man high, built from rough wood and iron sheets, mounted on 4 iron wheels. A bowl-sized muzzle stared from the front, dark and grim. They rolled it down the slope toward the battling line. Both thieves and greenskins paused, curious. Orc boys tilted their heads, trying to make sense of it. The thieves shuffled back, wary. The man in the gray cloak pulled the cloth away. Sunlight flashed off iron. The muzzle glinted. The body was several planks of wood bound with heavy iron plates and rivets. At the breech, a small touch hole sat beside a bag of black powder, and a handful of stone shot wrapped in iron filings. Strange carvings ran along the barrel, an emblem Kasha recognized as Prince Barton's. "This is a cannon?" Kasha breathed. He'd seen Imperial firelock cannons before, huge beasts that could topple a wall with one shot. This machine was smaller but sturdier, its bore wider. Bone Tree peered at it and frowned. It wasn't a bow or an axe. It carried a dangerous look. He snarled to his orcs. "Don't just stand there. Smash that thing!" Orc boys roared and charged. The black-suited men drew scimitars and formed a blade screen in front of the cannon, meeting the first wave. Scimitars clashed with iron axes in a harsh, ringing din. The man in the gray cloak walked to the breach, took up a small tinder, and lit it. A cold smile flickered across his face as his eyes tracked the charging greenskins. Kasha exhaled, a tense hope rising. One shot from this, and the attackers could be blown to pieces. He did not notice the calculation in the man's smile, something unreadable beneath the calm. The foremost orcs were upon them, axes battering the cannon's wooden flanks. The men in black held them off with desperate swordwork. The tinder's flame grew closer to the touch hole. For a heartbeat, the fighting stilled. Everyone watched. The night goblins were confused. The thieves watched with hungry anticipation, and the man in the gray cloak's face was a mask of inscrutable intent. The flame moved nearer and nearer, about to touch the gunpowder at the breech of the cannon. On the gentle slope west of the howling forest, the dense pines knitted their branches until the sky was almost blocked, letting through only narrow slivers of patchy sunlight. Shito crouched half-hidden behind a thick trunk, a brass telescope in his hands. Feluole had bought it from a human merchant in Katushir. The barrel was engraved with fine patterns. Though its edges were worn, the lens showed the fighting on the distant ridge with shocking clarity. Through the glass, the scene trembled. Greenskins' iron shields clashed against the thieves' scimitars, blood splattering the dry grass red. Shito let a small smile curve his lips, then his expression froze. On the high ground, a dozen men in black combat clothes had rolled back a length of black cloth to reveal cannon muzzles as wide as bowls, staring at the charging greenskins like cold, unblinking eyes. The crude iron pieces looked like Ming-era red barbarian cannons. A cannon? Shitu's fingers tightened on the telescope until his knuckles went white. The muzzle in the lens showed a touch hole at the breech and a heap of black powder nearby, gunpowder. He had seen such weapons in the old films from his previous life. Even a small cannon could scatter a formation of heavily armored infantry. How had these scattered bandits and refugees gotten such a thing? It seems the Black Cloth Brotherhood really does have powerful backing, he muttered, narrowing his eyes. Faluole's letter had only said the Brotherhood were thieves who fled from Kobsanak territory. It never mentioned their relationship with Prince Patton's fiefdom. Now it looked like these people were simply dogs raised by Prince Barton, pawns meant to disrupt the Howling Trail, even supplied with heavy weapons like cannons. The man in the gray cloak by the cannon struck a spark. Boom! A muted roar rolled up from the ridge. The air vibrated even a few hundred meters away. White smoke laced with sparks billowed skyward, and a dark, solid shot spat from the muzzle with a shrieking rush. It skittered past the orc boy's shield line and slammed into the slope, spraying earth and stones and frightening the goblin lads into shrinking behind their shields. It missed, Shitu breathed, relieved for a moment, then frowned. The cannon's accuracy was poor, but its power was terrifying. Had the shot hit the shield wall, several front-rank orcs would have been blown apart. The greenskins on the ridge were stunned by the blast, their charge stuttering. But before hesitation could take hold, the raw ferocity in their bones flared. The thing the greenskins feared least was a terrifying toy, and the more dangerous it seemed, the more they wanted it. "Grab that iron lump," an orc boy bellowed, pointing at the cannon, and charged. The others followed, axes raised, forcing around the thieves' ranks toward the weapon. The man in the gray cloak hadn't expected the greenskins to be so reckless. He barked orders, and his black-clad men moved to shield the cannon. They were clearly trained, scimitars flashing, slashing the closest orcs and drawing hot, ugly gashes. Still, the greenskins' fury only intensified. One orc seized a thief's leg and yanked him down. Another slammed an axe against the cannon's iron and felt his arm go numb from the impact, the blade leaving only a shallow dent. Load it quickly," the man in the gray cloak shouted. Two guards darted to the breach with scoops, pouring gunpowder into the touch hole and tamping in a stone shot wrapped in iron filings, their hands shaking under the pressure. An orc had already clambered onto the cannon's flank and reached for the barrel. Boom! The second blast detonated close enough to blow the standing orc into pieces. The solid shot struck his chest, crude iron armor shattered like paper, the body exploding in a spray of blood and shredded flesh that splattered the nearest thieves in green skins. "Damn it!" Shitu cursed softly on the hillside, fists clenched until the nails dug into his palms. In the lens, remnants of the orc lay scattered beside the cannon, but the green skins did not fall back. They only grew more enraged. "Chop 'em up! Wah!" Bone Tree's eyes were bloodshot as he swung his iron axe, cleaving a thief's skull and charging the cannon. The rest followed, roaring like a pack gone mad, hurling their shields aside and throwing themselves at the guns. The man in the gray cloak went pale and ordered the guards to keep loading, but the greenskins pressed so close the gunners fumbled, spilling powder as they parried incoming blows. Just as the clash reached its most furious point, a low, drawn horn sounded from deep within the forest. Woo, woo! The note carried command. The charging greenskins froze. Bone Tree's frenzy abated as a sliver of reason crept back into his bloodshot eyes. This was the retreat signal the boss had agreed on. "All of you stop! Retreat!" Bone Tree slapped an orc who was still hacking and barked. "Boss says retreat! Can't you hear?" Stunned, the orc tried to argue, but Bone Tree dragged him away by the scruff. Even those still enraged dared not disobey. Among the greenskins, the leader's word was law. Some who retained their wits hauled the berserk ones back. As they fell back, they still hacked at the thieves. The goblin lads clutched spears and followed. Seeing the greenskins pull back, the thieves on the ridge erupted in cheers. Kasha stood among them, his face streaked with blood, his long sword dripping. He watched the receding backs, then at the cannon beside him, and a greedy light flared in his eyes. "Chase them! Chase 'em down!" Kasha roared. "They're scared. With this cannon, we can cut all those green skins to pieces." The man in the gray cloak grabbed Kasha's arm. Urgent. "Leader Kasha, don't pursue. The greenskins' retreat is strange. There could be an ambush." "An ambush?" Kasha shrugged him off angrily. "What ambush could a pack of green skins who only know how to charge set up? Didn't you see them cowed by the cannon?" He pointed toward the retreating greens, then at the cannon at his side. "With this treasure, even if it's a trap, I'll blast it flat." The man in the gray cloak tried to dissuade him, but Kasha didn't listen. With a roar, he sprinted out, long sword held high. Kill those greenskins. Take their armor. Take their weapons." Over 800 thieves surged behind him like locusts, abandoning their camp and chasing the greens. Only the smoking cannon and a few trembling refugees remained on the ridge. Stolen goods lay scattered and ignored. On the hillside, Shito lowered the telescope, a cold smile on his lips. He waved, and 2 goblin scouts slipped from the trees and bowed, waiting. "Tell Kez to act according to plan," he said, his voice flat. "When Kasha's men enter the pine forest, strike." "Yes, boss," the scouts answered and slipped into the woods, vanishing among the trunks. She too raised the telescope once more. In the lens, Kasha and his 800 thieves were driving after the fleeing greenskins, crossing the howling trail and heading into the pine forest. There, Kess led over 300 night goblins, poison archers, lying in ambush all morning. Their mushroom-tipped arrows had dried, death crawler spider legs pressed to the earth, waiting for prey. The real show is just beginning. Shito put the telescope away and stepped toward the forest. Sunlight flickered through the needles, dappled on his green skin. His bone staff tapped the ground as he walked. Each step felt like crossing the fate lines of Kasha and his thieves. The cannon's smoke thinned on the ridge. The pine forest fell silent, except for the wind in the leaves, an overture of death waiting for the hunters to walk into its shadow. 77, Black Cloth Brotherhood 7th, Idiot. The man in the gray cloak grit his teeth as he watched Kasha lead over 800 men off in a mad pursuit. He should have seen it coming. Those thieves were fools. A small victory had gone straight to their heads. Now the camp was nearly empty. If the greenskins turned and counterattacked, they wouldn't even have the strength to resist. "Quick, dismantle the cannon. Hide it in the tunnel by the swamp." He barked to the dozen guards behind him. These were Prince Patton's loyalists, highly trained men who could execute orders without question. They dropped their scimitars and rushed to the gun carriage, working to disassemble the cannon. That secret weapon could not fall into greenskin hands. But before they could unscrew the breech bolt, a rough roar came from the bushes on the right side of the camp. "Charge! Grab that iron lump!" Over 30 green figures sprang from the undergrowth. Scarface led them, his head shaved, the long knife scar across his face glinting in the sun, and he carried a gleaming iron spear. Behind him, more than 30 goblin spearmen hunched low, iron tips leveled at the guards. Their short legs pumped like a pack of wolves. Stone had set this ambush earlier. While the main fight dragged on, Scarface had flanked around to the back of the camp, aiming straight for the cannon. He had seen it fire on the orc boys and decided then and there that such a powerful iron lump had to be taken back to Yadu. The man in the gray cloak stared in disbelief. Where had another greenskin group come from? How many were there? "Stop them!" he roared, drawing his flexible sword and charging toward Scarface. He was too slow. Scarface was a dozen paces from the cannon. He hurled his spear. It whistled through the air toward the man loading the gunpowder. Pfft! The spear pierced the man's back. He choked and dropped the powder pouch, black dust scattering across the ground. The other guards split, half drew scimitars to hold back the spearmen. The others redoubled their efforts to dismantle the gun. But it was already too late. Scarface and his goblins crashed in. "Chop off their hands! Don't let them take the cannon apart!" Scarface shouted. He slammed the butt of his spear into a guard's wrist. There was a sick crack as the arm broke and the sword clattered free. A goblin lunged, driving its spear into the guard's ribs. Blood spurted. Small but savage, the goblins moved like monkeys, slipping beneath guards' legs to stab calves, clinging and biting, dragging men down. Prince Patton's guards were well trained, but they couldn't handle the ferocity and numbers of the goblins. Men fell, soon lying in pools of blood. The man in the gray cloak knew the cannon was lost. His face hardened. He fumbled in his chest, drew a small black bottle of incendiary liquid, and prepared to smash it against the iron to destroy the weapon rather than let it be taken. Scarface saw the motion. With a savage throw, he sent his spear toward the man's arm. The man in the gray cloak barely dodged. The spear grazed his sleeve and lodged in a tent pole. The bottle slipped from his fingers and rolled toward the swamp. "Catch the one in the black robe. The boss wants him alive," Scarface barked, pointing at the man in the gray cloak. A few goblins broke off and closed in. Pale now, the man understood he would be taken if he stayed. He turned and ran for the swamp. He could swim, and in the deep peat, the greenskins couldn't follow. Scarface watched him go, but did not give chase. Seizing the cannon was the priority. He bounded to the iron barrel, eyes alight at the bowl-sized mass. "Careful with it. Don't damage it. We gotta drag this back to Ironhold and let Big Valley study it." The goblins halted their killing and clumsily swarmed the gun. Some lifted the carriage, others wrestled the iron wheels into place. Sweat ran down their faces, but they grinned. Bringing such a treasure home would mean a reward from the boss. The refugees who'd been used as human shields at the back of the camp were in chaos. They watched the fighting, neither daring to help nor to run, until they saw the goblins completely focused on the cannon and ignoring them. Quietly, they snatched their few belongings and bolted for the swamp and the dense tree line. Scarface glanced their way and shrugged. Unarmed civilians were not worth the trouble. At the end of the Howling Trail, Kasha led the main force of over 800 thieves like a pack of wild horses toward the pine forest. "Faster! Don't let the greenskins escape," he shouted, running at the front with his long sword swinging. The men behind panted. Those in leather armor lagged and fell back, while bare-chested youths surged ahead. The neat formation stretched into a 100-meter-long line. More thieves lagged until some dropped out, but none dared to stop. Everyone wanted armor and weapons, and to shine before their leader. "Leader, wait for us!" called the men at the rear, breathless, but Kasha never looked back. His mind raced with slaughter. He imagined leveling the greenskin camp with the cannon, taking the reward from Prince Patton, and returning a lord of Kabsanake territory. He watched the greenskins ahead draw nearer, a cruel smile on his face, certain he would wipe them out soon. The forward scouts entered the pine forest. Sun slanted through the canopy, dappling the ground. The forest was silent, except for footsteps and heavy breathing. "Where are the greenskins?" One of the front thieves stopped and looked around. The men who had been running ahead had vanished. A rustle came from above. "Who is it?" the thief demanded, looking up into the dark branches. Pairs of green eyes stared down at him. "Fire!" The command came from the treetops. Black lassos uncoiled and fell like vipers, wrapping around necks and limbs. Before he could react, the thief was jerked upward and left dangling from a branch, muffled cries cut short. "It's an ambush!" Panic spread as the other thieves turned to run. Night goblins stood up from the canopy, notching poisoned arrows, dark purple mushroom powder gleaming on the tips in the dappled light. Swish, 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 poisoned arrows rained down. Unprepared thieves were struck and went numb, their weapons dropping. They foamed at the mouth, convulsed, and fell silent. Someone shouted, "Run for the edge of the forest." The thieves scattered, bolts of panic propelling them outward. But death crawlers ridden through the trees by the night goblins leapt from branch to branch, firing relentlessly. Men fell without ever seeing their attackers. Desperate thieves fired aimlessly. In the chaos, an arrow from behind pierced one of their own, and he fell with a scream. Men stepped over his body and ran on. The scene dissolved into bedlam. In 15 minutes, more than 100 thieves who had charged the pine forest lay dead. The survivors clustered in a clearing, wildly swinging blades, eyes wide with terror, unable to pick out where the threats came from. High in the canopy, Kez sat astride a 3-meter death crawler, his black cloak whipping in the breeze. He looked down at the panicked thieves and sneered. Just as the boss had said, these humans were useless trash. He raised a hand. The night goblins ceased firing, slid down, mounted their crawlers, and silently encircled the thieves, cutting off any retreat. Outside the forest, Kasha arrived with the trailing thieves. He looked at the scattered corpses and at his men trapped inside and felt the color drain from his face. Suddenly, he understood that the man in the gray cloak had been right. It was a greenskin trap. "Retreat! Get out now!" he roared, and would have charged into the trees to lead them out, but a single, unified shout burst from the forest. "What?" Countless green figures surged from the shadows. Bone Tree led over 100 orc boys, axes and cleavers flashing. Their earlier feigned retreat had been bait to lure the thieves into this killing ground. Now the net closed. Kasha looked at the charging orcs and then at the men caught inside the forest. For the first time, the long sword in his hand trembled. He felt his certainty evaporate. How deep a trap had the greenskins laid? 78. Black Cloth Brotherhood 8. Wah! A deafening roar rose from deep within the pine forest. Bone Tree, bare-chested, carried the heavy iron axe that had cleaved through 3 thieves. Blood darkened the seams of his armor, but it didn't slow his charge. Over 100 orc boys followed, their iron axes and cleavers flashing cold light. The clatter of armor and their roars formed a green torrent sweeping toward Kasha's men. The thieves at the front had not yet recovered from the shock of the ambush when the orc boys hit them. A thief in leather raised his shield, but with a crack, the wooden shield split. The axe blade, carrying its momentum, plunged into his chest, spraying blood across another thief's face. That thief's legs turned to jelly. He tried to run and was kicked down by an orc behind him, his throat slit by a cleaver. Bone Tree spearheaded the assault, plunging into the thieves' ranks like a chisel. The greenskins had never been timid in the face of death, and the fury of comrades wiped out by cannon fire moments earlier made their eyes wild. Some orcs grappled with thieves on the ground, biting throats. Others rained iron axes down on fleeing backs, each strike spraying crimson. The 800 or so thieves Kasha had mustered were a hastily assembled rabble. Earlier, they'd pressed the attack thinking of looting greenskin armor and weapons. Now, under a frontal orc assault and chilled by poisoned arrows from the trees, they lost the will to fight. The men in the rear were the first to break. Some threw down weapons and ran screaming from the pine forest. Some dove into bushes, disoriented. A few lay flat and pretended to be dead, hoping to survive. "Don't run! I'll cut down anyone who runs!" Kasha roared from a scrawny horse stolen from a merchant caravan, swinging his longsword. His personal guards drew steel and hacked down a few of the fastest fleeing men, trying to steady the line. But once the rout began, it was like a breaking dam. The crowd trampled over bodies and shoved the personal guards aside, just to take another step. Kasha's fury boiled over. He swung and cut down a thief who shoved one of his guards, but more men fled. The personal guards, fearful of striking their own, could only roar impotently, unable to stop the flood of running men. Then a rustling came from the pine canopy, not wind, but the sound of death-crawler legs scraping bark. "Jump down! Slaughter the runaways!" Kez snapped. In the next second, more than 300 3-meter-tall death-crawlers dropped from the treetops. The black spiders landed with a whoosh, their 8 barbed legs impaled thieves' backs, pinning them. Night goblins tumbled to the ground, some pulling poisoned daggers and stabbing fallen thieves through the heart. Others knocked poisoned arrows and fired into the backs of fleeing men. Dark purple arrowheads sank into flesh. The struck thieves clutched their chests, collapsed, twitched, and died. Riding their death crawlers like phantoms, the night goblins weaved through the thieves' ranks. Spider silk snagged fleeing men, while poisoned blades and arrows reaped lives. The already chaotic rabble looked like lambs to the slaughter, struggling in vain inside the greenskins' encirclement. About 30 of the fastest thieves exploited the chaos and broke toward the edge of the pine forest. Stumbling into a clearing, their eyes lit with the hope of survival as they spied the open, howling trail ahead. If they could cross the clearing and dive into the dense woods beyond, the greenskins couldn't catch them. But 2 steps from safety, they saw a familiar green figure on a small hill outside the pine forest. Stone stood with hands clasped behind his back at the top of the slope, pine needles clinging to his green skin, a smoothly polished bone staff in one hand. Behind him, 100 goblin archers stood in 3 crooked ranks, bows crooked, quivers slung low, a few wiping sweat with their sleeves. When Stone raised his staff and pointed vaguely at the fleeing thieves, the goblins fell silent and raised their longbows in unison, arrowheads aimed at the 30 escapees. Stone had specially transferred these hunters from Yadu. Their accuracy wasn't as good as the night goblins, but their range was greater. 100 arrows loosed together would blank the whole clearing. Fire. Stone's voice wasn't loud, but it reached every archer. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! A black cloud of arrows hissed through the air. The lead thief had just taken a step when 3 arrows punched into his back. His body toppled, blood streaming along the shafts. Another, shoved by someone behind, staggered into the volley and became a living pincushion. A few tried to run back, but were struck by poisoned night goblin arrows, collapsing and twitching dead. Not one of the 30 escaped. Their bodies lay a dozen paces from the howling trail, blood staining the dry grass red. Their last, desperate bid for survival ended there. On the hill, the goblin archers whooped and waved their arms. This was their first total hit in a major battle. Even Stone glanced at them with a faint smile. In the pine forest, Kasha stared at the bodies in the clearing, utterly panicked. He knew the battle was lost. The greenskins had set a trap, orcs charging the front, night goblins encircling from the rear, archers blocking the exit. Staying longer would mean being ground into meat paste. "Leader, run east. There's a swamp tunnel over there," a personal guard whispered, voice shaking. He was one of the few who knew of a secret tunnel in the camp that led deep into the swamp, bypassing the greenskins' encirclement. Kasha snapped back, no longer caring for his men's lives. He pulled at the reins and snarled to his dozen personal guards, "Follow me! East!" He spurred the scrawny horse toward the swamp. The guards pursued, some discarding longswords to run faster. They didn't look back. The only thought in their heads was to get out of the pine forest. Bone Tree, in the thick of it, saw Kasha flee and wanted to give chase. "Don't let that lad escape. Don't pursue." Stone's voice came from the slope. Bone Tree paused and looked up. Stone was waving him off. Though puzzled, Bone Tree stopped and watched Kasha's figure vanish into the trees, spitting, "That lad's quick!" The fighting in the pine forest ebbed. The orc boys leaned on their axes, breathing heavily, armor spattered with blood. Night goblins counted bodies from their death crawlers and picked up dropped scimitars and iron swords. The goblin archers clattered down the slope and gathered around Stone, eagerly retelling their achievement. Stone walked down the slope and approached the scattered thief bodies. He crouched and picked up an arrow, the shaft plain poplar, the head marked with the forging patterns of Prince Patton's fiefdom. "A move by Prince Patton's fiefdom," Stone sneered, already turning plans over in his head. Kasha's escape didn't bother him. If they could catch the man in the gray cloak, they could learn Patton's secrets. Besides, they'd recovered the cannon. Prince Patton's fiefdom would have to pay that debt sooner or later. In the distance, Scarface grunted as he and a few goblins labored to drag the cannon toward the slope. The barrel was mud-streaked but intact. A couple of lads lay on the wheels trying to help. Scarface kicked them off. "Careful, this thing's worth more than your skins." The metallic smell of blood faded from the pine forest, replaced by greenskin cheers. Orc boys looted weapons, night goblins gathered poisoned shafts, and the goblin archers mobbed the cannon, poking and peering at the iron lump. Stone stood on the high slope and watched the direction Kasha had fled, his eyes unreadable. He knew Kasha wouldn't get far. Kess had already stationed men at the swamp tunnel's exit. 79. Black Cloth Brotherhood eyeing. On the eastern edge of the pine forest, branches and leaves trembled under the weight of clawed feet. 8 spindly legs of a death crawler scraped deep gouges into tree trunks as Kez rode it through the canopy, his black cloak whipping behind him. A poisoned arrow was knocked to his bowstring. His gaze was fixed on the fleeing figure ahead, Kasha and his bodyguards, scattering like startled rabbits across the forest floor. Dry twigs snapped loudly underfoot. "Quick! Don't let that human get away!" Kess snarled, nudging the spider's carapace with his boots. The death crawler obeyed, launching itself from one pine to the next and covering 8 meters in a single bound. Its legs slammed down with enough force to shower the trail with needles and leaves. A dozen night goblins followed in a dark pursuit line, the spiders weaving through the treetops as they closed in on Kasha. Kasha, reckless as a wild ox in combat, nevertheless fled with uncanny speed. He ditched his longsword and wore only light leather armor. The cloth purse of coins at his waist was clutched to his side as he ran. His guards lagged behind, some breathless, some twisted an ankle and fell, becoming easy targets for the night goblins. Whoosh! Kez loosed a poisoned arrow that struck a guard squarely in the back. The man stumbled and fell, motion leaving him within moments. Panic made the others run harder, but poisoned arrows found them too. Within half an hour, only 3 of the dozen guards remained, pressed close behind Kasha, faces drained of color. Kasha cursed Prince Patton's fiefdom in his mind. He hadn't expected to fall to Katushir's army or to die by the fiefdom's intrigues. Of all things, he never imagined he would be driven to death by a bunch of greenskins in this cursed wood. If he'd known how troublesome they were, he'd never have agreed to Prince Patton's idiotic plan. Still, he gritted his teeth and pushed on. The pouch at his waist contained 3,000 gold coins and a few gems pinched from merchant caravans, enough to buy him a new life under a false name if he could just escape the forest. Ahead, the trees thinned and a rotten, fishy mist drifted up, the swamp. Kasha's face brightened as if he had found a lifeline. He glanced back at the relentless goblins, yanked hard on the reins, and forced his horse into a rear. Before the animal could recover, Kasha slid off, shoved a nearby guard aside, and sprinted for the marsh. "Leader, wait," his guards called, trying to dismount, but poisoned arrows from the pursuing night goblins struck them down, blood soaking the muddy bank. Kasha paid them no heed. He shoved his horse into the swamp. The animal whinnied and panicked, but was immediately swallowed by the black mud, leaving only a few air bubble whirlpools. Kasha dropped to a knee at the waterline, took a breath, and plunged into the mire. Half submerged, he crawled like a loach toward the reeds. The mud clung like glue. Every movement cost him. Cold, foul water seeped through his leather, and his teeth chattered, but he could not stop. Only by burrowing into the thick reed beds at the swamp's center could he hope to lose his pursuers. He remembered the little island ahead and the hidden boat that could carry him along an underground stream out of the forest, if he could just reach it. When Kes and his death crawler reached the swamp edge, they watched Kasha vanish into the black muck. The hunter's face darkened. Death crawlers could leap through trees, but swamps were their bane. Once their legs sank, they were trapped. Kes raised another poisoned arrow. "Shoot! Don't let him get away," he roared. The night goblins complied, a dozen black-feathered bolts flying like streaks of lightning into the fog. The swamp swallowed their aim. The mist thickened. Kasha's outline blurred into reeds and mud. Arrows either plunged harmlessly into the morass or were deflected by reed stalks. Instead, a few of the already injured guards on the bank took the arrows, collapsing as the swamp's insects descended. Kasha lay still, listening until the sound of flight and arrow shed finally faded. He wiped the mire from his face and let a grin of relief spread across his lips. No matter how fierce the greenskins were, they wouldn't brave the swamp to pursue him. A few hundred more meters, and he would be at the little island with the boat. As he reached out for the reeds ahead, the swamp shuddered. Gurgling and bubbling erupted from the mud. Something enormous pushed up beneath the surface, heaving aside silt and slime. Kasha's heart sank. A massive dark shape rose, a hulking body sheathed in dark green scales like plate armor. 2 arms thicker than tree trunks ended in scimitar-like claws. A rusty iron chain dangled from one wrist, the other end locked to a huge stone axe. Its long, alligator-like head bore a pair of vertical yellow pupils that fixed on him, green saliva dripping from its jagged fangs and filling the air with a sickly stench. Crackasigal? Kasha's voice trembled. He'd seen illustrations in noble texts from Kabsanake territory, lizardmen war slaves, stronger even than Saurus warriors, but with minds as dull as stone, attacking everything that moved except their own kind. But the Crackasigal in front of him was no mere legend. It gave a low, thunderous growl and lunged. Kasha scrambled backward, but the swamp held him like a vice. The mud clamped his legs immovably as the scaled hand closed in, mud and water weeds clinging to its claws. "No!" A high scream tore through the marsh. The Crackasigal crushed Kasha in one massive grip. Leather and bone cracked audibly. Blood flecked the water as Kasha spat it out, eyes wide in shock, still clutching the pouch of coins. He did not move again. The creature held the body like an insect and tossed it into its mouth. Fangs shredded flesh. Gore dripped into the swamp, calling hungry black flies. Kess and the night goblins watched from the bank, frozen and speechless. Poised atop their death crawlers with poisoned arrows still notched, they had been certain victory was at hand, until their prey was swallowed by a monster. None had expected such a behemoth to rise from the mud and devour a man whole. When the crackling finished, it turned its yellow eyes toward the goblins. It growled, shifting its massive bulk and sending a wave of mud splashing across the bank. The simple creature recognized them as a new source of prey. Kess snapped out of his shock, panic flaring. He had seen Skarsnik's collection of lizardman scales before, hard enough to stop an iron axe. This monster was twice the size of a death crawler. One swipe from those claws would tear a spider in half. "Retreat! Back to the pine forest," Kez barked. The goblins spun their spiders and fled, racing away from the swamp as the crackling watched them for a few moments before sinking back into the mud. It did not follow. The creature's lumbering bulk was ill-suited to the forest beyond the marsh. With another gurgle, it slid beneath the surface, leaving only a few bubbling whirlpools. Kez rode until he reached the tree line and finally pulled up, breathless and trembling. He looked back at the mist-swaddled swamp, silent and brooding, and forced his voice steady. "Damn it! How can there be such a thing in this forest?" He wiped sweat from his brow. The hunt had turned into a horror show. Kasha devoured, the Black Cloth Brotherhood leader dead. Yet beneath his fear lay a cold satisfaction. Without a leader, the Brotherhood would scatter or be cut down. They would no longer be a threat. "Let's go. Back to Pine Forest. Report to the boss," Kez ordered. A dozen night goblins nodded and followed him into the trees. Silence fell over the swamp bank. Kasha's purse peeked from the mud, its faint gleam swallowed by new silt until even that vanished beneath the black water. 80. Lizard Man. On the clearing outside the pine forest, the greenskins' cheers still echoed. A cold, mechanical sound rang in Shito's mind. His system settlement notification, which always chimed after a major battle. Catcloth Brotherhood Extermination Battle. Campaign rating, crushing victory, complete tactical deployment, excellent enemy elimination efficiency, minimal self-loss. Energy reward, 2 points. Special reward 1, Giant Squig, Infant 1. Already placed near the Yadu mushroom field, Skarsnik is responsible for feeding it. Special reward 2, Greenskin Shaman exclusive magic, Itching Invasion. Can project intense itching onto a designated enemy within 50 meters via a shaman totem, lasting 10 minutes. The afflicted will lose combat effectiveness due to scratching. Self-loss statistics: 7 orc boys, 15 goblin spearmen, 9 night goblins, no other casualties. Enemy loss statistics: 613 enemies eliminated, including 482 Black Cloth Brotherhood bandits, 131 refugee thieves, 297 captured. Shito smiled, rubbing his forehead. 972. Energy would be enough to upgrade Ironhold's forge. The giant squig could become a charging mount when it grew. The shaman magic would be perfect for ambushes. As for the losses, 31 greenskins were nothing for the Blackrock tribe. He looked across the clearing where Bone Tree stood, with his hands on his hips in front of the captives. Over 200 people were pressed into a circle fenced with crude wooden stakes. Most were ragged refugees. A few dozen were thieves in worn leather armor. All were gaunt and terrified. A couple of squigs crouched near the bonfire, stirring a huge iron pot filled with stolen flour, wild vegetables, and the odd piece of cured meat scavenged from the thieves' camp. It was a mush, but it smelled tempting. "Line up, all of ya, one by one." Bone Tree roared, scooping a ladle of hot porridge for each captive. A small, scrawny refugee child hesitated at the edge of the line. Bone Tree frowned, but bent down and handed the child a bowl, grumbling, "Eat quickly, don't dawdle." Greenskins normally bullied the weak. In their world, only those who could fight earned respect. Beating unarmed captives brought no glory. But under Shito's leadership and instructions, don't kill captives casually. The Blackrock tribe wasn't hospitable, but they didn't slaughter people on a whim. Bone Tree followed the order, even if he thought it a nuisance. The captives took the porridge and sipped cautiously. The terror in their eyes eased a little. They had expected to be butchered and fed to beasts. A thief who had once robbed caravans drank with tears in his eyes, recalling the guards he'd killed and feeling the bitter irony of the moment as he looked at the greenskins before him. Shito walked up and stood beside Bone Tree, surveying the prisoners. Half were refugees coerced by Kasha, the rest were habitual thieves. To him, there was no moral difference. They were all tradable goods. When Feluole's people arrive, hand all these captives over to them, Shito whispered. Sell the refugees for 5 copper each, the thieves for 10. Tell the merchants they're vagrants rescued while clearing the trade route, and have Feluole sell them through his southern plantation contacts. Bone Tree scratched his head. Sell them? I thought we were going to make 'em mine. We've got enough Gretchen for mining, Shito replied with a smile. Selling them means we don't have to feed them. We make coin, and Feluole owes me a favor. At least they'll survive in his hands. That's saving them, in my view. Bone Tree nodded, half understanding, and went back to handing out porridge. The captives didn't grasp the greenskins' language, but they felt the tension ease, and some dared to steal glances at Shito, confusion in their eyes. Back at the ruined Blackcloth Brotherhood camp, chaos reigned. Greenskins swarmed the loot like rats in a granary. A dozen orc boys tugged at a bundle of faded silk, threatening each other with axes. Goblins crawled over crates hunting for copper coins, squabbling loudly over a single silver piece because it looked pretty. Squigs darted away with stolen bread and cured meat, hoarding it in their tents. "Stop it, all of ya!" Scarface bellowed, forcing his way through the crowd with the cannon slung over his shoulder. "All this stuff goes to the boss for inventory. Anyone who grabs more will get blasted by this cannon." The greenskins froze. They weren't scared of a fight, but they remembered the cannon's killing power and didn't want to be its target. Scarface nodded with satisfaction and ordered the goblins to sort the spoils. Weapons on the left, rusty scimitars, sharpened wooden sticks, and 20 or so battered iron swords. Valuables in the middle, pouches of gold coins, faded silk, jars of honey, and spices taken from caravans. Grain on the right, 50 bags of flour, a dozen slabs of smoked meat, and baskets of decent potatoes. "The boss is going to be chuffed when he sees all this," Scarface said, stroking the cannon's muzzle. He'd already decided to study the weapon with Big Valley. If they could make a bigger one, they wouldn't have to charge in front lines anymore. Just then, Kess returned on his death crawler from the swamp. He slid off the giant spider and hurried to Shito, breathless as he told what he'd seen. Kasha crushed, the appearance of a lizardman, and the standoff that had forced their retreat. Shito's face darkened as he listened. He squatted, picked up a stick, and sketched a crude map in the dirt, circling the northern howling forest near the swamp. "Lizardman, Crackesigal," he murmured. This race was ancient, secretive, and fiercely xenophobic. Everything not their own was an invader. Crackesigal in particular were simple-minded but terrifyingly strong, 5 meters tall and able to crush an orc boys with a single slap. He let the knowledge he'd acquired settle into words. The lizardmen of Warhammer were an ancient people, their origin tied to a vanished godlike race. Long ago, silver-white craft arrived, bringing the Old Ones, who reshaped the world. The Old Ones created the Slan, huge, frog-like beings of great magical power, to be administrators and architects. Because the Slan's bodies were weak, the Old Ones bred the Saurus, savage, reptilian warriors strong in battle but limited in intellect, ideal as guards. For more dexterous and clever tasks, they made skinks, smaller, agile, able to handle javelins, blowpipes, and craft. And for heavy labor, they made the Crackesigal, massive, powerful creatures used to move huge stones and to crush enemies on the field. The lizardmen were created to carry out the Old Ones' great plan and guard the world. After the Old Ones left, the lizardmen stayed in Lustria, fighting chaos and other invaders, devoted to the tasks laid out for them. "It looks like there's a lizardman tribe in the northern howling forest," Shito said, standing and flicking the stick away. "Kez, send scouts north. Don't get too close. Just figure their activity range." "I will," Kez said. "I'll send night goblins on spiders. They're small and sneaky. They won't be noticed." Shito nodded, thinking through the tribe's priorities: expansion and trade route security, not pointless wars. The lizardmen had lived here for millennia and knew the terrain far better than greenskins. A full-scale fight might be winnable, but at great cost. "Don't engage them for now," he ordered. "If they don't attack us, we pretend we haven't seen them." Kez accepted the command and turned to organize the scouts. Shito walked toward the camp where the greenskins were once more squabbling over loot. He raised his voice and it drowned out the noise. "Be quiet, all of ya." The crowd fell silent and turned to him with a mix of respect and hunger in their eyes. "The loot will be distributed by tribe rank. Orc boys get weapons, night goblins get silk, goblins get grain, and squigs move the stuff, and each gets a piece of bread when they're done." A cheer went up. Orc boys proudly claimed iron swords and scimitars. Night goblins draped themselves in silk and rode their death crawlers in circles. Goblins shuffled off with bags of flour. Squigs dragged the pump cart and ran back and forth, faces full of expectation. Shito watched, satisfied. This extermination did more than wipe out the Black Cloth Brotherhood and open the Howling Trail trade route. It taught the Blackrock tribe the advantage of fighting with a plan, not just wild charges and hacking, but tactics and coordination to win with fewer losses and more booty. In the distance, a messenger from Filuole was on his way. After Shito's letter and news that the road had been cleared, Filuole had rushed men from the Merchant Guild to take custody of the captives and to thank Shito for opening the route. Shito looked northward at the mist-shrouded howling forest, where faint, unfamiliar roars rose from the swamp. He knew that forest held not only greenskins, humans, and thieves, but older, more dangerous races. The Blackrock tribe had a long road ahead. This great victory was only the beginning. By the bonfire, Skarsnik cradled the giant squig infant, no larger than a basketball, a round, green fuzzy ball, watching it gnaw on a poisonous mushroom he'd handed it. Skarsnik's eyes narrowed into a grin. "Grow up big," he muttered, "and help me smash folk when you're older." Shito patted Skarsnik on the shoulder. "Feed it well. When we go to war, we'll use it to break the lines." Skarsnik hugged the squig tighter. The sunset filtered through the leaves and gilded the camp, turning green hides to gold. Laughter, the clatter of spoils, and the whimper of a squig infant braided together into the Blackrock tribe's most vivid moment yet.